Hello guys, welcome to Veil Soul. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Mai Terumi tried to use Naruto for Kiri's politics but fell for him and betrayed the Mizukage Council? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, Tea and Other Weapons. The reign over Kirigakure never really stopped. It only changed its mind about how hard it wanted to fall. Mai Terumi stood at the tall arched window of her office, watching the harbor lights blur and reform through the streaked glass. Below, the village moved in its quiet, perpetual hush. Lanterns hung along the rope bridges, fishermen hauling the last of the night's catch, the long shapes of patrol shinobi sliding from rooftop to rooftop like fish through dark water. She held a cup of tea against her sternum, mostly for the warmth. She hadn't actually drunk from it in 20 minutes. Behind her, the doors opened without a knock. That alone told her who it was. "You called this meeting an hour late, Mizukage-sama." Elder Jami's voice had the texture of old paper, dry, brittle, faintly disdainful. He came in flanked by Lady Kasuga, whose pale hair was twisted into the same severe knot she'd worn for 30 years, and Genbu, who said nothing because Genbu rarely needed to. The three of them spread around the long lacquered table like a hand of cards being dealt. Mai didn't turn. "I was thinking. Thinking is a luxury, Lady Mizukage. We have come to discuss necessities." She let the silence sit until it became uncomfortable for them, not her. Then she turned, walked to the table, and set her cup down with the soft click of porcelain on wood. Her smile, when she gave it, was the one she used on foreign ambassadors, warm, bright, entirely fake. "By all means," she said, sitting. "Tell me my necessities." Jami slid a folder across the table. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The seal stamped on its cover, the Konoha leaf bracketed by a single spiral, told her everything. "Uzumaki Naruto," Kasuga said in that low, considered voice of hers, "will be arriving in Kiri the day after tomorrow as Konoha's official envoy. 3 months. Trade accords, defense cooperation, the standard suite." "I'm aware. I signed the invitation." "Then you are aware of what he represents." Mai tilted her head. "An ally, a friend of Kiri, the man who ended a war. The man," Jami cut in, "who at 26 holds more raw power than any single shinobi in the 5 nations. The man whose mere presence on a battlefield can shift the outcome of a campaign before a kunai is thrown. The man who, were he ever to turn his attention on this village with hostile intent, could level it before the bell towers finished ringing. He won't. Won't is not a strategy, Lady Mizukage. It is a hope. Hopes have killed more villages than blades." Mai finally looked down at the folder. Her fingers traced its edge. "Get to it!" Kasuga and Jami exchanged a glance. It was Genbu who finally spoke, in the soft, deliberate way of a man who had calculated this sentence 3 different ways before choosing the cleanest. "We want you to marry him." She didn't laugh. She wanted to. There was a bright, sharp bark of laughter trying to climb up her throat, but she swallowed it, because laughing at the council was the kind of thing that started long, quiet wars inside one's own walls. "You want me," she said slowly, "to marry the Hokage golden son." "Bind him," Jami corrected. "Through you, through Kiri, a union of the mist and the leaf at the level of leadership. The other nations will read it as alliance. We will read it as leash." "He's not a dog." Kasuga's eyes were the color of seawater under cloud. "He's a tsunami, and we are an island." Mai sat back. She looked at the 3 of them, at the careful arrangement of their hands, the way they'd seated themselves so she had to swivel to address each, and felt the old, familiar tiredness settle behind her eyes. This was how it always went. They issued, she executed. She wore the hat, but the hat had strings, and the strings ran into older hands than hers. "And if he refuses?" "He won't," Jami said, with such serene confidence that it almost made her angry. "Not you. We chose you for a reason, Lady Mizukage." "How flattering!" "It is not flattery, it is arithmetic. You are the most beautiful woman in the 5 nations, you carry 2 Kekkei Genkai, and you are unmarried at an age that makes every elder in 3 countries clench his teeth. He is a young man who has spent his entire life starved of family. The arithmetic," he repeated, "is sound." She let that sit. She picked her tea back up and took a slow sip. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. "And if I refuse?" The room cooled by a degree. It was Kasuga who answered, and her voice was almost kind. "You won't, Mai, because you know what we know. Kiri is held together with thread and stubbornness. Another bad decade and we go back to being the bloody mist, or we get swallowed." You took this hat to keep that from happening. We are asking you to keep doing your job. May set the cup down very carefully. Her smile, when it returned, was thinner than before. All right, she said, I'll do it. Jami's shoulders eased a fraction. Genbu inclined his head. Kasuga simply watched her, and Kasuga had always been the one May found hardest to read. One condition, May added, name it. I run it, not you, not your handlers. Not whatever pretty agents you've already picked to whisper in his ear at dinners. Me, start to finish. You get the result. I choose the method. A long pause. Jami's mouth tightened, which on Jami was the equivalent of another man slamming a fist on the table. Agreed, he said at last, but Lady Mizukage, do not develop feelings. We have seen what becomes of operators who confuse the role with the woman. Keep your hand on the hilt. She smiled. This one was real, and because it was real, it had teeth in it. Elder Jami, she said, I have not had feelings on a schedule in 20 years. I'm hardly going to start now for a blonde boy from the land of fire. The blonde boy from the land of fire arrived 2 mornings later, on a slate-gray dawn, walking into Kirigakure like he had walked there 100 times before. May watched him from the high gallery above the main gate. Ao stood at her shoulder, single visible eye fixed on the approaching figure with professional intensity. Chijuro stood a respectful pace behind, her aim carry across his back. That's him, Ao said. I expected a larger entourage. He didn't bring one. No guard, no guard. He walked from the fire country border to here, alone. It would appear so. Ao made a low, considering sound, either confidence or stupidity. With him, May said, I'm starting to think it's neither. I think it's just a complete lack of interest in performing for us. Naruto Uzumaki crossed the threshold of the gate. He had grown into his height, not enormously tall, but solid in a way that had nothing to do with bulk, like someone who had simply been used hard and held up well. His hair was shorter than the war years, the wild spikes tamed into something almost intentional. He wore a plain dark coat over standard tactical wear, no Hokage crest, no advertisement of rank. The only flash of color was the orange of his undershirt, just visible at the collar. He looked up at the gallery. He found her immediately, not with searching, just with the small, certain movement of a person who already knew where to look. He smiled. It was an unguarded smile, the kind people gave each other across crowded rooms when they were old friends. May felt something unfamiliar do a small, irritated flip behind her ribs and crushed it before it could finish. Mizukage-sama, he called up, voice carrying easily over the courtyard. Permission to enter your village. Permission granted, Lord Hokage. Ah, don't do that. I left the hat at home on purpose. She allowed herself a real laugh, small, controlled. As you like, Naruto. She descended the long staircase with measured steps. Ao moved with her. Chijuro kept the upper position. By the time she reached the courtyard floor, Naruto was already there, hands in his coat pockets, rocking very slightly on his heels like a man stretching out a long walk. Up close, his eyes were the problem. They had always been blue, that startling, almost glass-bright blue people remarked on, but somewhere in the years she hadn't been looking, they had picked up an additional quality. A stillness. The kind of stillness that wasn't calm so much as settled, the way deep water was settled. A person could fall into eyes like that and never hit a bottom. She had not, she reminded herself, signed up to notice. Welcome to Kirigakure, she said, offering her hand. He took it, warm, calloused along the inside of the thumb. The handshake was brief and entirely unremarkable, except that when he let go, he said very quietly, You smell like jasmine, she blinked. Pardon, your perfume, he smiled, easy and apologetic. Sorry, I shouldn't lead with that. My mouth gets ahead of me. Long walk, no one to talk to. Where do you want to start? Behind her, Ao made a faint sound that might have been a cough or a laugh strangled at birth. May recovered in less than a heartbeat. She had not become Mizukage by losing footing on small surprises. She smiled, and this smile was the one she'd practiced for 48 hours. With tea, she said, if you don't mind. I find diplomacy improves when the parties are sitting down. Tea sounds great. My private receiving room, then. Ao Chijuro escort the rest of his. She paused. There is no rest of him. There is no rest of me, Naruto confirmed cheerfully. Then escort us. They walked. Her private receiving room was small by cage standards, a deliberate choice. 3 walls of dark wood, one of paper screens that opened onto an inner garden where a single twisted pine grew out of moss stones. Rain tapped on the roof in soft, irregular percussion. A low table, 2 cushions, an iron kettle already steaming on a brazier. She knelt. He knelt opposite. He did it gracefully, which surprised her. She had half expected him to flop, the way the legend of him as an oversized boy demanded. But he settled with the loose ease of someone who had spent years on roads and floors and didn't particularly care about either. She poured. The tea was a special blend. She had selected it personally that morning. The leaves were ordinary, the addition was not. A trace, a careful, calibrated trace, of a kiri herb that did nothing on its own, but in combination with a particular relaxation point she would press during conversation, encouraged a person to speak more openly than they had intended. Nothing crude, nothing that would show on a poison detection seal, just a gentle, chemical tilt of the floor in her direction. She handed him the cup. He took it with both hands the proper way and held it under his nose a moment. "Smells good," he said. "It's a local blend." He took a sip, closed his eyes briefly. "That's nice. What's in it?" "Various things, a few mountain leaves, a little smoked pine. And the other thing," she did not flinch. She was very, very good at not flinching. "The other thing." He opened his eyes. They were entirely friendly. He took another sip, swallowed, set the cup down. "The other thing," he said again, pleasantly. "I'm not sure what it is. Tastes a little like the underside of a wet stone. Kurama doesn't recognize it, which means it's local. He's seen most of the major poisons. He doesn't think it's dangerous. He just thinks it's something." She held her smile in place with the kind of muscle control that had taken her 3 decades to build. "It's an herb," she said. "That's used here for hospitality, to put guests at ease." "Ah," he nodded thoughtfully. "Like how a good host pours generously. Something like that. That's nice." He picked the cup back up, drank again, set it down, looked at her, that same easy smile in place, and said, "I'll finish the cup. I just wanted you to know I knew. Seemed unfair otherwise." The room went still. Outside, the rain shifted register, falling harder for a moment, then easing. May did not move. She watched him across the small table, this man she had been told to bind and net and lead by the heart, and felt for the first time in a very long time the floor of her composure tilt under her without her permission. She laughed. It was short and genuine and startled out of her. "Well," she said, "that's a start I wasn't expecting." "Sorry." He didn't look sorry. "Was that rude?" I went back and forth. I figured rude was better than dishonest. Most people would have said nothing. Most people don't get to be Mizukage. Meaning you'd have caught it eventually, maybe in a week, maybe in 2, and then this whole conversation would have to happen anyway, except by then you'd be embarrassed and I'd be annoyed and we'd have wasted a week. He picked up the cup, drained it, set it down upside down on the tray, the universal gesture for no more thank you. "I'd rather we start from where we're going to end up anyway." She refilled her own cup slowly to give her hands something to do. "And where are we going to end up, Naruto?" "I don't know yet." He grinned, and for a second he looked exactly like the boy she remembered from the war summit, the one who'd shouted at 5 kg at once without losing his footing. "That's the fun part." "Are you always this?" She searched for the word. "Direct." "Pretty much. I tried being subtle. It went badly. Sasuke laughed at me for a month." She found herself laughing again. She made a mental note to be careful about that. Laughing was a tell. "Then let me be direct in return," she said. She set her cup down, folded her hands, met his eyes squarely. "The Mist Council wants me to marry you." Ao, in the hallway outside the screen, made a noise like a man swallowing his own tongue. Naruto's eyebrows climbed 1/2 inch. He sat with that for a beat. Then he nodded slowly, as if she had told him something mildly interesting about the weather. "Okay," he said. "And what do you want?" "Pardon? You said the council wants. I asked what you want." May opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It had been a long time since anyone had asked her that question and meant it. The council asked her to execute. Her advisors asked her to decide. Her people asked her to provide. The question of what she personally wanted was so unfamiliar that for a moment she could not locate the answer in herself. She covered it with a smile. The smile was a tool, she used it. "I want," she said, "what's best for Kiri." "Sure, everyone says that. What do you want?" "That's a complicated question, Lord Hawkage." Naruto, he waited. He had, she realized, an enormous capacity for waiting. It wasn't the trained patience of a hunter, it was something quieter, the patience of a person who genuinely had nowhere else he'd rather be. She found to her annoyance that she didn't have a clean answer for him. so she gave him a partial one, which was the closest she could come to honesty without losing the game. "I want my village to survive me," she said. "I want it not to need a Mizukage like the last one ever again. I want the council out of my office, and I want," she stopped, considered, decided, "I want to stop being tired." He nodded, once, slow. "Okay," he said, "I can work with that." "You can work with that?" "Sure." He leaned back on his hands, looking up at the rain-blurred screen. "I'll tell you what I'm not going to do, and then I'll tell you what I am. Sound good? By all means. I'm not going to marry you because some old people in a back room decided I should. I don't take orders from your council, and I'm not going to act like I do. I'm also not going to be useful as a weapon you point at them, because the second I am, I belong to whoever's holding the pointing stick, and I belong to me." He looked back at her. "What I am going to do is be here for 3 months, do the work I came to do, and spend as much time around you as you'll let me. Because," he tilted his head, considered her like an interesting puzzle, "I think you're actually pretty great when you're not running an operation, and I'd like to find out which one is the real you." She stared at him. Inside her chest, something old and tightly wound made a small, complicated sound she did not want to examine. "You're a strange man," she said. "I've been told. And you're not afraid." "Of what?" "Of me." He smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't even particularly confident. It was just clear, like rainwater. "May," he said, and the use of her first name, plain like that, hit her harder than she would later admit. "I've stood in front of things you can't imagine. I've talked monsters into being people. I've held my best friend's hand while he tried to kill me. I'm not afraid of a woman pouring me tea." He paused. "I am, however, very interested. There's a difference." She did not know in that moment what to do with her face, so she did what she always did when ambushed by feeling. She put the smile back on, smoothed it down at the edges, and stood. "Then welcome to Kirigakure Naruto," she said. "I'll have rooms prepared in the residential wing. We can begin formal sessions tomorrow." "Sounds good. And Naruto, the tea." She gestured to the upturned cup. "I do apologize, it was clumsy of me." He stood too. Up close, he was just slightly taller than she was, enough that she had to look up the smallest amount, which she resented and also did not, which was confusing. "Don't apologize," he said. "It told me you're serious. I'd be insulted if you'd come at me with anything less. Just next time, try something I won't see coming. Make me work for it." He winked. He winked. Then he bowed very correctly and showed himself out. The door closed. The screen slid back. Ao stepped in with the carefully blank face of a man who had been listening to every word and pretending not to. "Well," he said, May picked up the upturned cup, turned it right side up, set it down again. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything." "Don't." He waited, because Ao was good at waiting too, in a less devastating way than the hawkage. Eventually she sighed and dropped onto her cushion again, one knee tucked up under her hand at her temple. He knew Ao. I gathered. He drank it anyway. I gathered that too. She made a frustrated gesture toward the door. He asked me what I wanted. The audacity. "Ow, apologies, Lady Mizukage." She rubbed her temple. The headache was not the tea. The tea had been mild. The headache was the dawning understanding that she had been given a target who did not behave like a target, and a script that he had read before her, and that the council was going to want a progress report inside the week. "Tell Chijuro to walk the residential wing personally tonight. I don't want any of Jami's pet ears in those walls." "Already done." And she paused. "Find out everything you can about what he's been doing the last 2 years, not the official record, the other one. Where he goes when he disappears for weeks, who he talks to, what he reads. I want to know who I'm actually dealing with." "You'll have it by morning," she nodded. Ao did not move. "What?" she said. "Mizukage?" He was choosing his words. Ao only chose his words when he was about to say something she wouldn't like. 20 seconds, from the moment he saw you in the courtyard to the moment he sat down at your table. 20 seconds, and he had already pulled you onto his ground. I've watched you handle ambassadors, daimyo, and the rakage himself. I have never seen you on someone else's ground. I am not on his ground, Lady Mizukage. I am not." "Ow," he bowed. He did not argue. He left, sliding the screen closed behind him with a soft, considered click. May sat very still in the empty room. The rain tapped on the roof. The kettle hissed on its brazier. The cup he'd drunk from sat on the tray, a faint smudge of his thumbprint on the lacquer. She reached out almost without deciding to, and turned the cup so the smudge faced away from her. Then she turned it back. Then she stood up sharply, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead briefly against the cold glass. "Don't develop feelings," Jami had said. "I have not had feelings on a schedule in 20 years," she had answered. In the receiving room behind her, the cup with the thumbprint on it caught the lamplight, and May Terumi, 5th Mizukage, killer of Yagura's purge dogs, master of 2 bloodline limits, woman of impeccable composure, stood with her face against the rain glass and admitted in the smallest voice she had that she might be in some amount of trouble. In the residential wing, Naruto unpacked the single bag he had brought. It contained 3 changes of clothes, a sealed scroll of mission reports, a battered copy of a book Jirya had written that he kept for reasons he didn't entirely understand, and a small wooden frog Boruto had carved for him badly when he was 9. Set the frog on the windowsill where it could see the harbor. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the frog, and said out loud, "She's better than I expected." "She's playing you," said the voice from deep in his belly, rumbling like a distant landslide. "Yeah, you're going to let some of it, boy, what? This is going to get complicated." Naruto smiled at the wooden frog. The frog, being wooden, did not smile back, but he didn't need it to. "Yeah," he said, "I'm counting on it." Outside, the rain over Kirigakure shifted register again and began, finally, to ease. Chapter 2. The long game. The report Ao left on her desk before dawn was 38 pages long. May read it twice in the gray half-light with her tea going cold and a single lamp burning behind her chair. She had asked for the unofficial record. Ao had delivered. Naruto Uzumaki had spent the 2 years since stepping down briefly from Hokage duties, handed off temporarily to a council during a transitional period, walking, literally walking. He had crossed wind country on foot twice. He had spent 4 months in a small fishing village on the Wave Country coast, where, according to a Kiri agent who had stumbled across him by accident, he had been helping a widow rebuild her dock. He had been seen in Iron Country in a tea house arguing about land reform with 3 samurai elders. He had spent 6 weeks in the ruins of Uzumaki alone, doing what no one could quite confirm. He had killed, on official record during this period, exactly twice. Both targets were rogue bounty hunters who had taken contracts on children. Both engagements had lasted less than a minute. Both had been resolved without collateral damage. He had, by every quiet metric Ao's people could gather, become precisely the opposite of what a man with his power was supposed to become. He had not built a faction. He had not consolidated influence. He had not married, despite a long, well-documented and unhappily ended engagement to the Hyuga heiress that had concluded by mutual decision the previous spring. He had not, as far as anyone could tell, accumulated anything but distance and quiet. At the bottom of the report in Ao's small, controlled handwriting, "Lady Mizukage, I can find no leverage on this man, not because we have not looked, because there is nothing to find. He owes no debts. He guards no secrets that would shame him. He has no addictions, no concealed lovers, no estranged children, no off-ledger assets. He gives away most of his stipend. He sleeps in inns under his real name. He is, in the technical and operational sense, the worst possible mark I have ever been asked to assess." Respectfully, Ame sat with the report on her lap for a long time. Then she set it aside, stood, and went to dress for breakfast. She had set the first session for 10 in the morning in the formal hall, large room, long table, full attending staff, every appropriate witness. A controlled environment. She arrived early, took her seat at the head, and watched the various Kiri officials file in with their folders and their carefully selected expressions. Naruto arrived precisely on time. He came alone again and sat where she gestured on her right hand. He had a single notebook with him and a pencil that looked like it had been chewed on by a small child. The session went, by all visible measures, perfectly. He was sharp. That was the first surprise, though it shouldn't have been. He had read every trade brief. He asked questions in places where May's own ministers had not thought to ask them. When the Minister of Maritime Affairs tried to slide a tariff adjustment past him by burying it in a paragraph about port maintenance, Naruto looked up, blinked once, and said, "Sorry, that line on page 11, second paragraph. Are we agreeing to a 4% or a 6%? Because the table says 4 and the text says 6, and I think one of those is a typo, but I want to make sure which one's the typo before I sign anything. The Minister of Maritime Affairs, a man named Hekaru who had been performing this particular sleight of hand on foreign envoys for 15 years, went a very interesting color. 6, Lord Hawkage, apologies, the table is in error. Make it 4, Naruto said pleasantly, since that's what your table promised. I assume your table didn't write itself. May, at the head of the table, did not allow herself to smile. She did allow herself, briefly, to think good. It went on like that for 3 hours. Whatever else Naruto Uzumaki was, he was not a figurehead. He was not a celebrity standing in for the real diplomats. He had done the work. He kept doing the work. By the time the session broke for the midday meal, 3 of her ministers were sweating, and 2 of them looked like they were calculating their pensions. At the door, as the room emptied, Naruto leaned slightly toward her and said under his breath, "Your maritime guy is stealing." "I know. Just checking. He's been useful to keep where I can see him." "Fair." He straightened, smiled at the room, and went off to find lunch like nothing of consequence had been said. Ao caught her eye from across the chamber. He did not say anything. He did not have to. That afternoon, she canceled her late meetings and invited Naruto to walk the upper gardens with her. This was the second move. The council had drawn it up for her, although she had rearranged the order. State dinners later, the formal courtship trappings after that. The garden walk was supposed to be intimate but defensible, visible enough to be reported, private enough to be remembered. He met her at the south stair of the residence at 3. He had changed out of the formal coat into something simpler, a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up to the elbow. His forearms were a map of old, faded scars, the kind that had healed clean and long ago. She made herself not look at them. The upper gardens of the Mizukage residence climbed a low ridge that overlooked the harbor. Stone paths wound between black pines, the moss between the stones kept exact by a gardener who had served 3 Mizukages and had opinions about all of them. The rain had stopped for once. The sky was a pale, scrubbed gray. They walked. "This place is beautiful," he said after a while. It was not a polite throwaway, he meant it. He had stopped to look at a particular twisted pine that grew from a crack in a boulder. "It's 300 years old, that tree. How does it live like that?" "Stubbornness, mostly. The gardener feeds it. The roots have found water somewhere in the rock. I've asked. He won't tell me where." Naruto laughed, a real surprised laugh. "Your gardener keeps secrets from you." "My gardener keeps secrets from everyone. He's worked here through 4 regimes. He's outlasted all of them by being useful and saying nothing. That's actually really smart. He's the most dangerous man in this village, and I let him cut my flowers." They walked on. The path curled. Below, the harbor opened in slow gradations of slate and white, the long shapes of fishing boats moving against the tide. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always." "Why this job?" She glanced at him. "Mizukage, yeah. Someone had to do it. That's the line you give foreigners. It's also true, sure, but it's not the whole answer." She walked a few more steps. The gravel hissed quietly under their feet. "When Yagura was killed," she said, "the village split. 2 factions, then 4, then 7. The bloody mist had been a meat grinder for so long that no one knew how to stop being it. The elders couldn't lead. Too many of them had blood on their hands from the purges. The young ones couldn't lead. They hadn't lived long enough to be taken seriously. I was in the middle. I had killed enough people to be respected, and not so many that I couldn't be forgiven, so I took the hat, because if I didn't, someone worse would have. And now I'm tired." She had said the same thing to him yesterday, but yesterday it had been a chosen confession, calibrated for effect. Today it slipped out, and she heard the difference in her own voice and was annoyed by it. He didn't push. He just nodded once and kept walking. "You," she said, mostly to shift the angle. "Why did you give up the Hawkage seat?" "I didn't give it up. I'm taking a turn off." "Same question then." He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "I realized," he said finally, "that I'd spent so much of my life trying to be wanted by my village that I'd forgotten to find out what I wanted from it, or from anyone, so I stopped. I went and lived like a regular person for a while, built things, talked to people, listened a lot. It turns out when you shut up for long enough, people will tell you the truth about how their lives actually work, and it's nothing like what we write down in policy documents." "And what did you decide you wanted?" He looked over at her. The afternoon light was thin and clear, and his eyes caught it in a way that was, she noted with the detached part of herself that was always observing, completely unfair. "I'm working on it," he said. They were standing at the railing now, the harbor below them. Down in the water, a small boat was making its way out, a fisherman late on his tide, sail up, hull low with whatever he was going out to catch. "Naruto," she said. "Yesterday you said you'd wait to find out which one of me was real, the operator or the woman." "I did. What if there isn't a difference? What if the woman is also an operator?" He thought about it. He thought about it the way he did everything, without rush, like the answer would be there when he got to it. "Then I guess I'll meet a really impressive operator," he said. "And I'll like her anyway, because the parts of you that I've liked so far haven't been the operator parts. They've been the parts where you slip. Yesterday when you laughed at me about the tea, just now when you said you were tired. Those are the parts that—" He stopped, shook his head, smiled at himself. "Sorry, I'm doing the mouth thing again. Pretend I didn't—" "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't pretend." He looked at her. She looked back. Down on the water, the boat's sail caught a gust and snapped tight, the small far sound of it carrying up to them on the wind. It would have been very easy, in that moment, to step closer. It would have been very easy to let the gravity of the conversation do what gravity does. The council would have approved. The script demanded it. Everything she had been planning for 48 hours demanded it. She didn't. She stepped back very slightly and put a polite 3 inches between them, and the moment passed without breaking, only thinning like fog burning off. "We should head back," she said. "I have a state dinner to prepare for. You'll be seated on my right." "Of course." "Wear something formal." "Please, I brought one formal thing. I hope it still fits." "If it doesn't, my tailor will fix it. Send him whatever you have." He bowed his head a fraction. They walked back down the path in companionable, dangerous quiet. At the foot of the stair, before they parted, he paused. "May." "Yes." "Whatever they told you to do," he said. "You don't have to do it the way they wrote it. Just do it the way you'd actually do it. The other version isn't worth either of our time." He didn't wait for her answer. He bowed again, more deeply, and disappeared into the residence. She stood at the foot of the stair for a long time. Then she went to dress for dinner. The state dinner was, by the standards of Kiri ceremony, a small one. 14 people, the long low table in the inner hall, the carved screens drawn back to show the rain garden lit by stone lanterns. The cooks had outdone themselves. 6 courses, all built around the morning's catch, the sashimi cut so thin it lifted in the breeze when the screen doors opened. The council was there. All 3 of them in their formal robes, seated at the lower end of the table where they could watch without being central. Jami's eyes followed Naruto every time he moved. Kasuga smiled, the way she smiled at everyone, with the corners of her mouth and nothing else. Genbu, as ever, said nothing. Naruto wore black. The tailor had done quick work. The fit was sharp, the collar high. He looked, May thought before she could stop thinking it, devastating in a way she hadn't been prepared for. Like a sword someone had finally bothered to polish. He behaved beautifully. That was the worrying part. He charmed the elderly merchant Tsubasa, who never let anyone charm her, by listening to a 40-minute story about her grandfather's salt trade. He made the daimyo's nephew laugh, actual, surprised laughter, by deflecting a clumsy diplomatic dig with a self-deprecating one of his own. He drank exactly enough sake to be considered polite and not a sip more, and he watched her, not constantly, not obviously, but she could feel his attention the way one felt the temperature of a room, present, steady, calibrated. Every time she said something, his eyes touched her face briefly before returning to whoever he was speaking to. It was not the watch of a man strategizing. It was the watch of a man who genuinely wanted to know how she was doing. This was worse, somehow, than the alternative. She would have been able to handle a tactician. Halfway through the 4th course, a low chime sounded from the outer corridor. A page slipped in, knelt at May's elbow, and whispered. She straightened. "Forgive me," she said to the table. "There's an incident at the harbor. A grain ship's lost its mooring in the swell. 2 of the dockworkers are in the water. I'm needed to authorize the rescue protocol." "Of course, Lady Mizukage," she stood. Naruto stood with her smoothly without being asked. "I'll come. It's not necessary. I want to." The council's eyes were on her. She made a calculated assessment in a quarter of a second, let him, and inclined her head. "Then come." The harbor was chaos. The swell was bad. A late storm pushing up from the south had caught the night watch off guard, and one of the big grain carriers had ripped its forward line in a gust. The ship was bucking against its remaining moorings, hull grinding against the dock with sounds like a giant grinding teeth. Crates had spilled. 2 men were in the water between the hull and the pilings, one trying to climb a rope, the other not visible at all. A small crowd of dockworkers and off-duty shinobi had gathered, shouting over each other. A Jonin was trying to coordinate a chain rescue. The harbor master was screaming about the second mooring. May strode out onto the dock. Her aides flanked her. The crowd parted. Status! 1 man up, 1 man under Mizukiji-sama. He went under maybe 30 seconds ago. A child screamed. It came from the dock's far edge. The small running figure of a girl, maybe 7, maybe 8, sprinting toward the bucking ship with the kind of total, unthinking velocity only a child can produce. She was screaming a name, a man's name, probably her father, probably the one in the water, and she was going to go straight over the edge in about 2 seconds, into the gap between hull and piling where a body could be crushed to paste between one wave and the next. May's hand was already moving for a seal. Ao's was moving for a kane line. The Jonin nearest the girl was turning too slow. Naruto was already gone. She did not see him move. One instant he was at her shoulder. The next there was a displacement of air, and he was at the dock's edge, and the child was in his arm, and he was twisting his body in the air, because he had also kept going past the edge, because there had not been time to do anything else, and he hit the surface of the water between the hull and the piling exactly as the next swell drove the ship hard against the dock. May's breath stopped. The hull slammed home. The whole dock shook. Crates fell. For 1 long, terrible second there was no sign of him. Then the water beside the dock burst upward in a column, and Naruto came up out of it, the girl held high above his head with 1 arm, the other arm wrapped around a man who was coughing seawater and barely conscious. He had braced his feet against the side of the hull, walked up it against the swell, and was now climbing the slick black wood of the ship's side with the casual focus of a man going up a flight of stairs. He reached the deck. He set the girl down. He laid the man flat. He looked up at the dock, met May's eyes, and called perfectly calmly over the wind, "Mooring line, front cleat, I'll catch." A coiled mooring line was thrown. He caught it one-handed without looking. He bent, he fixed something, she could not tell what from this distance, and the ship, which had been moving like a wounded animal, stopped. Just stopped. Held against the swell by whatever he had done, the line and his own grip and probably a very large amount of chakra she did not see him gather because he had not gathered it the way a normal shinobi gathered. The crowd was silent. The harbor master was the first to speak. He said very softly, "Holy shit!" The Jonin in charge of the rescue snapped out of his shock and started barking orders. The chain went into motion. The other dockworker was pulled from the water alive. Medics took the half-drowned father. The little girl, when they tried to lift her down off the ship, refused to leave Naruto's side and clung to his coat with both small fists. He picked her up. He carried her down a hastily extended gangplank. He walked her past May without ceremony and delivered her directly to the medic tending her father knelt, said something quiet to her, touched the top of her head once, and stood. Then he turned, dripping seawater onto the dock in a slow, widening pool, and walked back to May. "Sorry," he said, "dinner's probably ruined." She could not, for a moment, speak. "I'll have a coat brought," she said finally, "and dry clothes. Don't worry about it, Naruto." She looked at him. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His sleeves clung to his arms. There was a thin red line along his jaw where the hull had grazed him. It was already closing. His eyes were exactly as steady as they had been over tea 2 days ago. "Thank you," she said. He smiled. It was a small, slightly tired smile. "Anyone would have." "No," she said, "they wouldn't." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded, accepted that, and turned to help one of the dockworkers right an overturned crate. She stood on the dock in her formal robes, with rain starting again in a fine, soft mist, and watched him help. Not as the Hawkage, not as the envoy, just as a man who was already wet and didn't see why the crate should stay on its side. Ao came up beside her. He was, for once, not pretending to be a professional. His single eye was wide. "Lady Mizukage." "Yes, I withdraw my assessment of yesterday." "What was your assessment of yesterday?" "That he could level the village in a heartbeat." "That's still true." "Yes, but my assessment was that this was a concern." She did not answer. She watched Naruto Uzumaki right another crate. joke quietly with the dockworker who was helping him, push wet hair out of his face, and laugh. Something inside her, something she had walled off so many years ago that she had almost forgotten the shape of the wall, took a small, slow breath through a crack she had not realized was there. She turned away before her face could betray her. "Send word to the kitchens," she said. "Dinner is concluded. Have hot food sent to his rooms. And Lady Mizukage, tell the council I will not be receiving them tonight. They will insist. Then they will insist." She walked back toward the residence with her aides trailing, robes heavy with rain, her composure held by main force the way one holds a door against a wind. In his rooms an hour later, dry and in a borrowed dark robe, Naruto sat by the window with a bowl of hot soup and the small wooden frog Boruto had carved for him. A scroll lay open on the low table beside him, a Kiri text on local sealing traditions, one he had borrowed from the residential library that morning. He was not reading it. He was thinking about a child's face, the girl on the dock. The exact second of unfiltered terror in her eyes before he had caught her, and the exact second after, when she had looked up at him and decided, without any reason at all, to trust him completely. That second was the part he was thinking about. He had been getting that look from people since he was 16, and he had still not figured out what to do with it. "She watched you," Kurama rumbled somewhere deep. "I know. Differently this time. I know. Boy, what? Don't pretend you didn't do that in part because she was watching." He sat with that. He picked the frog up off the table and turned it slowly in his hand. "I would have done it anyway," he said. "Yes, but you're right. I knew she was watching." "Is that bad?" "It is human." "That's not an answer." "It is the only answer you are getting from me tonight. Eat your soup." He ate his soup. Outside, in the upper residence, Mai Terumi sat at her desk and pretended to read a report on tariff schedules. She turned the page every 90 seconds, exactly the way one did to look like one was reading. She had not absorbed a word. In the lower residence, in a small windowless room that smelled of old paper, Elder Jami sat across from Lady Kasuga and Genbu and tapped a single dry finger on the table between them. "She cancelled our briefing," he said. "She is tired," Kasuga said. "She is not tired, she is avoiding." "After 2 days, Jami, after 2 days," he agreed. "Which is faster than I projected, which means we adjust." Genbu, who had been silent through the entire conversation, spoke for the first and last time that night. "Don't push her yet," he said. "She is still the best card we have. We push when she begins to hesitate publicly, not before." Jami's mouth tightened. "And if she hesitates privately first, then we will know," Genbu said, "because we will be watching." He stood, bowed to the other two, and left. Kasuga and Jami remained at the table. Outside, the rain over Kirigakure had, against all odds, stopped entirely. A single seam of moon showed through the cloud cover, pale as a knife. "Do you trust her?" Jami said softly. "I have never trusted her," Kasuga said. "I have only ever needed her. And now," she thought about it. "Now," she said, "I need her more carefully." Chapter 3, Salt and storm. The breeze on the harbor faded by morning. Crates were restacked. The grain carrier was remoored properly under the harbor master's red-eyed supervision. The little girl's father was discharged from the medic's tent with a wrapped rib and instructions to drink no salt water for a week. Naruto, by his own account, slept like a stone. Mai, by no account but her own, did not. She was at her desk before the 5th bell, when the light over the eastern ridges had only barely separated itself from the dark. The tariff report from the night before sat on her blotter, still unread. She moved it aside, drew clean paper toward her, and began writing, not orders, not policy, just a list, her own list, things she knew about Naruto Uzumaki, things she did not, things she suspected, things she would do today. Halfway down the 3rd column, the would-do one, her brush stopped. She looked at the page. She had written, without quite meaning to, "Find out what he wants from me." And then under that, in the same hand, "Find out what I want from him." She put the brush down. After a long moment, she picked it up again, dipped it deliberately, and inked out both lines. Then she stood, crumpled the paper, and dropped it into the brazier. The flame took it eagerly. She watched it burn until there was nothing left but a flake of black ash curling against the iron. There was a knock. "Enter!" Chijuro came in alone, which surprised her. He was holding 2 scrolls and a face she had not seen him wear before, closed, focused, the way he looked just before he drew her aim-carry. "Mizukage-sama, Chijuro!" He laid the scrolls on her desk and stayed standing. You said last night to walk the residential wing. I walked it. I also walked the corridors above and below it, and the service shafts and the upper rafters. And I found 3 listening seals I did not place. None of them were on the residence's standard inventory. All 3 were keyed to the same chakra signature. Whose? I don't recognize it, but it's a Kiri operator. The seal style is one of ours. The construction is recent, 3 days at most. May looked at the scrolls. She did not need to open them. She tapped one finger on the desk. Where were they placed? One in the corridor outside his rooms, one in the briefing chamber. One, he hesitated, in your private office behind the screen by the brazier. She let that sit. I assume you removed them. I replaced them with decoys feeding into a loop chamber I set up 2 floors down. Anyone listening for the next several days will hear nothing but ambient sound and an occasional cup being set down. They'll know they've been spoofed within a week. Until then, we're clean. She felt something cold and clarifying move through her chest. It was almost a relief. Suspicion was easier to act on than feeling. Chujuro, Mizukage-sama, how angry are you right now? He blinked. It was not the question he had expected. Lady May, they put one in your office. That's not anger. That's loyalty. I'm asking about anger. He thought about it. His hand had not left the strap of her aim-carry. Quite, he said, quite angry. Good, hold on to it. I may need it. Yes, Mizukage-sama, he bowed. He paused at the door. Mizukage-sama, may I? He chose his words carefully. May I say something out of turn? Always. He's a good man. She did not look up. I am aware. I wanted to say that in case nobody else has. He bowed again and left. She stared at her desk for a long time after the door closed. The official schedule that morning was a tour of the outer training grounds. It had been on the books for a week. A courtesy, a chance for Konoha's envoy to observe Kiri's Chunin and Jonin in their elements, a low-stakes outdoor day in a series of indoor ones. It had also, until last night, been a low-priority entry on May's calendar. She rescheduled 3 meetings to attend personally. The training grounds lay an hour's walk east of the village proper, past the outer rope bridges and over a saddle of dark hills where the pines grew thick and the ground broke into bare granite. Streams ran fast through the cuts. The air smelled of wet stone and resin. It was, in May's private opinion, the most honest piece of land Kiri owned. Nothing pretty about it, no scenery for tourists, just hard rock and harder weather, the same stuff her shinobi were made of. She walked it with Naruto, Ao, and a small retinue of officers. The morning was cold and clear. The rain had held off for once. The little procession moved at the pace of conversation, with Naruto asking questions that her senior instructors had to scramble to answer well. He was, she noticed, watching the terrain as much as he was watching the demonstrations. Every time the path crested, his eyes went to the sight lines first. Every time they crossed a stream, he noted the bridges and the natural fords. He did it without performance, the same way another man might glance at the sky to check the weather. Force of habit, she said quietly when they fell back from the retinue a few paces. What is? Reading the ground, he smiled, a little embarrassed. You caught that? You've been doing it since we left the gate. Old reflex, I stopped trying to break it. What does it tell you about my country? He thought about it. It tells me, he said, that anyone who tries to invade you over land deserves what they get. 3 good kill zones between the harbor and here. You could lose half a village and still hold this ridge with 60 people. The harbor's the soft spot. You know that, though. I know that. Your harbor defenses are good. The coast east of it is better. The coast west, he tilted his head, is where I'd come in if I were coming in. That's where Kasuga's family holds the coastal watch. He did not answer. He kept walking. She filed it. The demonstration ground was a wide flat of granite at the head of a small box valley. By the time they arrived, 2 squads of Kiri Jonin had already assembled, 12 shinobi in standard mist-pattern grays, with 3 swordsmen of the new generation among them. All of them visibly trying to look as though receiving the hawkage as an observer was an ordinary Tuesday. The drill was a standard combat scenario, a mock raid on a foreign envoy's quarters, with one squad playing attackers and the other defenders, using ration paint instead of weapons. It would run for 40 minutes, reset, run again. The kind of thing Naruto had observed in his own village 100 times. He watched the first run with his arms folded and a small, focused smile, the one May was beginning to recognize as his paying attention face. Halfway through, his smile thinned. She caught it. Something. Don't mean Naruto. He glanced at her, then back at the field. Your defender squad's lead left flank, the one with the short tanto. He's pulling a chakra signature I've felt before, recently. Where? In my room. Yesterday afternoon when I came back from the gardens. Faint trace, like someone had stood near the wall about an hour earlier. She kept her face very still. Are you certain? Pretty certain. How pretty? Pretty enough that I'd bet you a bowl of ramen, but not pretty enough that I'd kill him over it. Don't kill him. I wasn't going to. The drill ended. The squads reset. The lead in question, a wiry man in his 30s, faintly scarred at the temple, wiped paint off his vest and exchanged a quick word with one of the swordsmen. Naruto's eyes did not leave him. The second run began. It went wrong in the first 30 seconds. It was not, May would later think, an obvious wrongness at first. It looked initially like a poorly executed feint. The attacker squad coming in slightly off the practice arc, their lead breaking from the prepared script. Then the defender squad broke from its script too. 3 of them, the lead with the tanto, plus 2 more, all 3 with that same not-quite-Kiri standard movement quality, peeled off the formation, vaulted the rocks at the demonstration ground's edge, and came directly at the observation platform. At her, at Naruto, at both of them. The paint kunai in the lead's hand was not paint. May saw the wet shine on the edge in the same instant. She saw his stance change from drill form to real form. The small but unmistakable lowering of the hips that meant a man had stopped pretending. The other 2 carried real blades they had been concealing under their drill vests. It was a good ambush, technically. 3 men, close range, with the entire valley as their backstop and the cover of an accident already half built into the demonstration. She would replay it later and acknowledge the craftsmanship. It was also, in its execution, the slowest attack she had ever lived through. Ao moved, Chijiro moved, her 2 escorting Jonin moved. The platform exploded into motion and then went still, because by the time any of them had crossed half a step, it was already over. Naruto had not stood up. He had not drawn anything. He had not even uncrossed his arms. The lead attacker, the man with the tanto, the one whose chakra he had named 90 seconds earlier, was 3 feet from the platform's edge, frozen mid-lunge, with the point of his own blade an inch from his own throat, and his wrist locked in a configuration that no human wrist enjoyed. Naruto's right hand had crossed the distance between them and returned in a single movement May had not seen complete. The hand was now folded back into the crook of his elbow as if nothing had happened. The second attacker had not gotten as far. He was on his knees on the rocks below the platform, both arms above his head, having apparently decided in the half-second of his colleague's incapacitation that this was not, in fact, the day. The third attacker had simply stopped, just stopped, standing in the open, weapon lowered, looking at Naruto with the expression of a man who had just understood viscerally that he had brought a knife to a phenomenon. The valley was silent. The lead attacker made a small, choked sound. His own blade trembled at his throat. He had not yet figured out how to lower it without slicing himself. Naruto, still seated, said very calmly, "Drop it, slow." The man dropped it, slow, "On your knees." "Hands out." The man went down. Naruto turned his head, mild, friendly, polite, and looked at May. "So," he said, "about that ramen bowl." She did not laugh. She wanted to. She did not. "Ow," she said, without taking her eyes off the 3 men below. "Bind them, separately, different cells, no contact between them, no interrogations until I authorize it, and I want a full check of every man and woman on this field before anyone moves off it. Now." "Yes, Mizukage-sama." The Kiri instructors had already realized. 2 of them looked sick. One of them was furious. The good ones were the furious ones. Those were her people, and they had just had 3 strangers walk into their drill and try to stab their Mizukage. The other one, the sick-looking one, would be having a private conversation with Ao before lunch. Naruto stood. He did it unhurriedly, brushing imaginary dust off the front of his coat, and offered her his hand. She let him help her up. She did not need help. She took the hand anyway. It was warm. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Number, good." That was all. He let go of her hand. He stepped down off the platform and walked over to the lead attacker, the man still on his knees on the rocks, and crouched in front of him at a polite distance. The man would not meet his eyes. Hey, Naruto said, gentle, as if to a frightened animal. You don't have to talk to me, you're going to talk to Ao. I just want to look at you once before they take you away. The man looked up. Naruto looked at him for perhaps 3 seconds. Then he stood and walked back to Mei. He's Kiri, he said low, only to her. I'd already figured that, but he's also scared. He doesn't think this was going to work. He knew it wasn't going to work. He was sent in anyway. You got all that from looking at him? Yeah, she did not ask him how. There were a number of things she was choosing today not to ask him how. They did not return to the village immediately. Mei would not have them ride away as if fleeing. Instead, she stood on the demonstration ground for a full hour while Ao's people processed the field. She gave statements to her own instructors. She spoke briefly and clearly to the assembled Jonin that this was not a failure of theirs, that the men responsible had been infiltrated into the drill at a level above the field captain, and that there would be a full inquiry that they would all support. The good instructors stood straighter. The sick-looking one disappeared with Ao. Naruto stood near her the whole time, silent, hands in his coat pockets, watching. He did not contribute. He did not need to. The presence of him on the platform, uninjured, uninterested in performing alarm, did more for Kiri morale than any speech she could have given. When the field was clear, they walked back together with the retinue ahead and now a few discreet paces behind. The path narrowed in the pines. The wind came down off the ridges. Mei drew her coat closer. So Naruto said, "So, you want to tell me what that was?" She did not turn her head. She kept walking. "Foreign operators," she said. "We've had warnings of infiltration attempts for months. Probably a faction tied to one of the smaller coastal lords. They'd love nothing more than to start a war between Mist and Leaf." He walked a few steps in silence. "Okay," he said, that was all, okay. She had expected pushback. She had built 3 different rebuttals for 3 different challenges. Okay landed in the empty space where her arguments would have been and sat there, vast and quiet. "You don't believe me," she said. "I didn't say that. You don't have to, I know my own lies, Naruto." "All right." He kicked a pine cone gently off the path. "I don't believe you. But I also don't think you're lying to hurt me, so I'm letting you have it." "Generous. I'm trying." They walked. The wind shifted. A few drops of rain found her face. She wiped them away with the back of her hand and kept her eyes on the path. "They were Kiri," she said finally, very quietly. "You're right, I think I'm almost certain they were sent by someone in my own house." "Yeah, don't yeah me. Sorry, why aren't you angry?" He considered. "Couple reasons," he said. "First, nobody got hurt. Second, you didn't send them. Third, you're more angry about it than I am, and there's not really room for 2 people to be angry about the same thing at the same temperature." "Naruto, Mei!" He stopped on the path. She stopped too, because not stopping would have been a small kind of rudeness she didn't want to commit. "I told you on the first day, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of your council. I'm not afraid of 3 men with bad intentions and a worse plan. I'm not going to spend my time here being afraid of things. That's not because I'm brave. That's just because I ran out of fear about 6 years ago and didn't replace the stock." She looked at him. She was suddenly, profoundly, tired in a way she had not been tired since the war. "I am going to fix this," she said. "I am going to find out who did it and I am going to make them stop." "Okay. You don't have to do anything." "I wasn't going to. And I am going to apologize for it, officially. When we reach the residence, there will be a record, because if I let it pass without a record, the council will read that as permission. Don't apologize to me. Naruto, don't apologize to your 3 men in their cells. They're the ones whose lives just got handed away by somebody who thought they were disposable. I'm fine. I'm always fine. Save your apologies for people who actually need them." She closed her mouth. He started walking again. She watched his back for a moment, the unhurried, slightly long-legged stride of him, the way he hunched his shoulders just slightly against the wind. Then she followed. The rain began in earnest before they reached the gate. Jami was waiting for her in her office. He had let himself in. He was sitting in the chair opposite her desk, hands folded over the head of his cane, the very picture of an old man with nowhere better to be. The lamp on her desk was lit. He had lit it himself. She did not break stride. She walked in, closed the door behind her with a precise, soft click, and crossed to her own chair. She did not invite him to remain seated. He remained seated anyway. "You weren't on my calendar," she said. "I am rarely on your calendar these days, Lady Mizukage." "There's a reason for that." "I'm sure. She sat. She let the silence work, because the silence belonged to her here in this room at this desk, regardless of who was in the other chair. He cracked first, or pretended to. Jami never actually cracked. I heard about the incident at the training grounds. Did you? A terrible business, she agreed evenly. 3 Kiri operators infiltrating a drill and attempting to assassinate a guest of state. A terrible business. Foreign operators, surely, disguised. My investigators are still confirming. Of course. But the early indications are local. He inclined his head slightly. The lamp threw a long shadow of his shape against the wall behind him. That would be, he said, very embarrassing for someone, wouldn't it? One imagines the council would want to be informed at every stage of such an investigation. One imagines, so that we might assist. So you might assist. A pause. Lady Mizukij, he let his voice soften, become almost grandfatherly. I have served 4 Mizukiges. I have in that time seen every variation of misjudgment a cage can make. The worst is not cruelty. The worst is not weakness. The worst is the moment a cage decides that their own conscience is a more reliable instrument than their counselors. Yagura, at the end, decided that. It was the beginning of the bad time. I am asking you, with all the affection I have for you, and I do have affection for you, whatever you may think, to remember which instruments you have, and which you do not. She looked at him a long time. Then she stood. She walked around the desk. She stopped beside his chair. She bent slightly until her face was level with his, and she said quietly, Elder Jami. Yes, Lady Mizukij. If 3 more Kiri operators come within 100 yards of Naruto Uzumaki with weapons drawn, I am going to assume the council's affection has expired, and I am going to act on that assumption. Quickly. Do you understand me? His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been threatened before. He did not flinch, but he did very faintly smile. I understand you, Lady Mizukij. Good. May I ask one thing in return? Ask. Do you still intend to carry out the assignment we discussed? She straightened. She walked back around her desk. She sat down in her own chair, folded her hands on the blotter, and looked at him with the same smile she gave to foreign daimyo. Yes, she said, I am carrying it out exactly as we agreed. I am simply doing it my way, as we also agreed. He stood slowly, using the cane. Then we are not, after all, in disagreement. No, she said, we are not. He bowed. He left. She sat in the empty office for a long time after the door closed. Then she reached into the bottom drawer of her desk, took out a small bottle of rice spirit that she had bought 11 years ago and never opened, broke the seal, poured a finger into a teacup, drank it in one swallow, set the cup down, and said to no one very softly, he did not believe a word of it. She was not, for a moment, sure whether she meant Jami or Naruto. She was reasonably sure she meant both. That night, very late, she walked to the residential wing herself. She did not bring an escort. She did not bring word. She stopped at the door of Naruto's rooms. The lamp inside was still lit, a soft yellow line under the screen. She raised her hand to knock. She did not knock. She stood there for perhaps a full minute, hand half raised, listening to the quiet on the other side, the soft sound of a page being turned, the occasional small movement of someone in a chair. Then she lowered her hand. She turned. She walked back to her own quarters. Halfway down the corridor behind her, the screen of his door slid open about an inch, just enough that whoever stood inside it could have seen the last of her, retreating, robe pale in the lamplight. The screen slid shut again. In his rooms, Naruto sat back down at the low table, picked his book up off the cushion, and turned the page he had not, in the last 40 minutes, actually read. She came to talk, Kurama said, somewhere deep. Yeah, she didn't. Number why he thought about it, because she hasn't decided yet. Decided what? Which side of herself she's bringing through that door. He set the book down. He looked at the small wooden frog on the windowsill where the harbor lights moved past behind it in their slow nightly grid. She'll come back, he said, just not tonight. And when she does, then I'll be here. The rain over Kirigakure, which had stopped at sunset, began again at midnight, soft, persistent, the kind that meant business. It would not stop for 3 days. By the end of the 3rd day, the council would convene without inviting their Mizukij. By the end of the 4th, Mei Terumi would find out about it. By the end of the 5th, the storm would no longer be in the sky. Chapter 4. The honest hour the rain held for 3 days, as promised. On the 2nd day, the harbor lost a fishing boat and gained a new sandbar where the old North Channel had been. On the third, 2 of the rope bridges in the outer village had to be retensioned, and a roof in the merchant district came down on a tea house that fortunately had already closed for the storm. On the morning of the 4th day, the sky cleared. It cleared in the abrupt, scrubbed way that Kiri's skies cleared after long rain, as if someone had wiped a window with a clean cloth. The air went bright and cold. The harbor went from slate to a hard, ringing blue. Even the moss between the garden stones looked startled by the light. May stood at her window and watched a flight of gulls move from the high cliffs back toward the open water for the first time in 72 hours, and felt, against her will, something inside her loosen by a fraction. The knock at her door was Ao's. She knew his knock by now, 3 evenly spaced, the third slightly softer than the first 2. He came in without waiting and shut the door behind him. "They met without you," he said. She turned from the window. "When?" "Last night, late, in Genbu's private rooms, not the council chamber. 3 hours. 2 coastal lords were present, the Ridge Lord and Lord Hajiwara of the Western Archipelago." She walked back to her desk and sat down. She did not pour tea. She did not steeple her fingers. She did not do any of the things her face would have done a week ago. "How do you know?" "Because Genbu's house steward owes my second cousin a favor older than either of us." The steward did not hear the substance of the meeting. He heard the duration, the attendees, and the fact that Jami left in a worse mood than he arrived in. Jami always leaves in a worse mood than he arrived in. This time he forgot his cane. She raised her eyes from the blotter. He forgot his cane. He came back for it half an hour later. He apologized to the steward, which is the part I would like you to focus on. Jami does not apologize to people he outranks. He apologizes only when his mind is somewhere else. She absorbed that. "Western Archipelago," she said. "The coastline Naruto pointed at 3 days ago, the one he said he'd come in through if he were coming in. Hajiwara is Kasuga's cousin by marriage." She put her elbows on the desk and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment. "Ow, Lady Mizukage, what does it mean when the council brings 2 coastal lords into a private meeting without me?" He was quiet for a beat. He chose his words. "It means," he said, "that they are no longer treating you as their instrument. They are treating you as a problem." She lowered her hands. "That was fast." "Yes, they gave me, 11 days, including travel and arrival, 12 days." She laughed once without humor. "I have run longer operations than that on the consort of a foreign daimyo, Lady Mizukage." "Yes, they are afraid of him, I know. They are also, I think, afraid of you." She looked up. "Of me? Of what you are becoming with him in the residence. They are old men and an old woman who have spent 40 years reading rooms. They can read this one. They know what they are looking at. They are not stupid. That is the part that makes them dangerous." She held his gaze. "What am I becoming, Ao?" He considered her. "Someone I would have followed," he said quietly, "even without the hat." It was, by Ao's standards, an extraordinary sentence. He turned in the small, efficient way he had and let himself out before she could find anything to say to it. She did not find anything to say to it. She sat with her hands flat on the blotter for a long time, watching the new light from the cleared sky lay itself across the wood in long, pale stripes. Then she stood and went to find Naruto. He was in the inner garden. He had borrowed a coat from somewhere, not his own, plainer gray, and he was sitting on the wide, flat stone at the foot of the twisted pine, eating a rice ball out of a paper wrapper, watching a small, fat carp move under the surface of the pond. He did not turn when she stepped onto the moss. "Morning," he said. "You knew I was coming. I heard the inner door. I closed it quietly. I have good ears." She walked to the pond. She did not sit. She stood at the edge of the stone, hands folded at her waist, watching the carp. "Tonight," she said, "after the evening session, will you come somewhere with me?" He took another bite of the rice ball. He chewed, he swallowed. "Where?" "Out of the residence, north of the village. I want to show you something." He glanced up at her finally with a faint, knowing smile. "Is this a courtship walk? It's whatever you want it to be." "May, Naruto." He considered her for a moment. "All right," he said. "I'll come. Wear something warm. The wind is bad on the headlands at this time of year." "I'll wear something warm." She nodded once and turned to go. "May," she stopped. "Yeah, bring whatever you want to bring," he said. "I'll meet you wherever you bring it." She did not turn back. She let the door of the inner garden close behind her and walked the long corridor to her office with her face arranged in the same composed expression she had worn into it. and underneath the expression her chest felt like a room with all the windows open. The evening session ran long. It was meant to. She had stretched it deliberately. 3 minor agenda items moved up, 2 ministers given extra speaking time, the closing remarks given to a junior protocol officer who needed the practice. By the time the last of the staff filed out of the formal hall, the western sky was the color of a brass coin, and the lanterns along the gallery had been lit. She found Naruto in the residence's outer hall, in a dark wool coat she had not seen before, with his hair pushed off his forehead by the wind that had been coming up off the harbor since sunset. He nodded once. He did not ask where they were going. She had brought no escort. She had told Ao that in plain terms an hour before. Ao had not argued. He had only said, "I will be aware of where you are without being where you are," which was Ao, for I am following you at a respectful distance, and you are not to make a scene about it. She had let it pass. They left the residence by a small side gate that opened onto a path most of the village did not know existed. The path climbed. It crossed a footbridge over a creek running high with the last of the storm, then bent north up the long slope of the outer headlands, where the pines thinned and the grass took over and the wind got serious about itself. Naruto walked beside her without speaking for almost an hour. She had thought she would have to fill the quiet. She did not. The silence with him was the kind of silence that had nothing wrong with it. It was simply the absence of words that did not need to be said. The path crested a long, open ridge. The land fell away on the far side in a long sweep down to a black cove where the sea worked at the rocks in slow, steady rhythm, white at the edges, dark at the center. Above them, the sky had gone the deep cobalt of the hour after sunset, and the first stars were out. She stopped at the edge of the ridge. "This is what I wanted to show you," she said. "I come here when I need to remember where the village ends." He looked for a long time. "It's beautiful," he said, quietly. He meant it. "There's an old watch post about half a mile that way," she pointed. "Abandoned. The bloody mist used it for cliff patrols. I had it locked up when I took office. I come up here once a month and check that the lock is still on. That's a strange habit. It's a habit that has kept me sane." He nodded, the way he nodded when he was filing something for later. They stood at the edge for a while. The wind moved her hair. She did not push it back. "Naruto! I'm going to do something now and I want you to let me." He turned to look at her. She did not give him time to ask what. She stepped close. She took his face in her hands, both hands, palms cool against his jaw, fingers light along the line of his cheekbones, and she kissed him. She had planned this kiss. She had planned it the way she planned an attack run. Angle of approach, point of contact, duration, the exact pressure that would communicate intent without communicating need. It was, by every measure she had ever used to measure such things, a flawless tactical kiss. She had not planned for the way her hands would shake. She had not planned for the way her own breath would catch. She had not planned for the way he would not move, not toward her, not away, just stand there with his face under her hands and let her kiss him like a man letting a bird land on his palm. She broke the kiss. She did not step back. She rested her forehead against his, which she had also not planned, and closed her eyes. "There," she said, and it came out a half-laugh, a thing too thin to be a real laugh. "Now we can stop pretending we don't know what this is supposed to be." He breathed out slowly. His breath was warm at her mouth. "May, don't! May! Don't, Naruto! Don't be kind right now, I cannot! I knew!" She opened her eyes. His were very close. She could see the small flecks of darker blue around the pupils that she had not noticed before because she had not been close enough. "I knew on the first day," he said. She did not move. "What?" "I knew on the first day, about the assignment, about the council, about all of it." She let her hands fall. She stepped back, half a step, then a full one. The wind found the gap between them and went through it. "How?" she said. "Sasuke! Sasuke! He has friends in Kiri, old friends, not the council's friends. He sent a letter ahead of me, a short one. Said, they're going to try to put her on you. Don't be stupid about it." Naruto smiled very faintly. "Sasuke is a man of few words. I came anyway. I came faster, actually. I cut a week off the road, because I'd already met you once at the summit years ago, and the thought of being," he hesitated, found the word, "pursued by you was, frankly, not a thing I was going to walk slower toward." She stared at him. "You!" Her voice was not entirely under her control. "You knew. The tea, the garden walk, the dinner, the kiss. I knew, and you played along. I played along with the parts that were also true. The parts that weren't, the bait, the angles, the lines you'd practiced, I let those go past me because I was waiting to see what was left when the operator got tired. She turned away from him. She faced the cove. She braced both hands on the iron railing at the edge of the ridge and breathed in once, twice, 3 times. You sat through 11 days of me trying to. You weren't trying, not really, not the way you would have tried if you'd meant it. You don't know what, May. He had stepped up beside her, not touching, just there. On day 1, after the tea, you didn't double down. You changed the script. On day 3, when I almost let you press the relaxation point in the garden, you stepped back instead of in. On day 6, after the dock, you didn't come to my room. You stood outside it and you walked away. You have been losing this game on purpose since the moment we sat down to it. I have known. I have been letting you. She did not turn. Why? She said. Why what? Why did you stay? There was a long silence. Below, the sea kept doing what the sea did. A gull cried far off, late, going home. He took a slow breath. Because the first time you laughed, he said, you laughed because I'd surprised you, not because the script said laugh. And the laugh was, he searched, small, quiet, like you'd forgotten you owned the sound and were surprised to hear it come out of you. I have spent a lot of years around people, May. I have heard a lot of laughter, that one I wanted to hear again. She closed her eyes. Because in the garden you told me you were tired and you meant it, and nobody tells me they're tired anymore. I'm the one people tell their strong things to, their brave things, their useful things. You told me a small, true, tired thing, and he laughed once at himself. I went home and wrote it down. You did not. I did. I keep a notebook. It's a terrible habit. Don't tell anyone. Naruto. Because at the dock you didn't run toward me when I came out of the water. You stood very still, and your hand went to your mouth, and you did not let yourself do the thing you were going to do, and I watched you choose not to do it, and I thought, that woman is in trouble, and she will not let anyone know she is. And I thought, he turned his head, and even without looking at him she felt it. I thought I would very much like to be the one she eventually lets know. She did not turn. The iron of the railing was very cold under her hands. You stayed, she said, because you wanted to see me lose. I stayed because I wanted to see you stop having to win. She put her face in her hands. She did it so suddenly she startled herself. She stood there at the edge of the headland with the wind taking her hair and both her hands pressed over her eyes, and she did not cry because May Terumi did not cry where anyone could see her, but she came as close to it as she had come in a decade. His hand found the small of her back. Light. The lightest possible touch. The kind of touch that said, I am here, and if you don't want me here, say it, and I will be somewhere else inside of a breath. She did not say it. After a long moment, she let her hands fall away from her face. She looked out at the cove. He kept his hand where it was. I had a plan, she said. Her voice was hoarse, and she did not try to fix it. I had a very good plan. I'm sure you did. I was going to bring you here. I was going to tell you about my mother. She used to bring me here when I was a child. It's a true story. I was going to use it. I was going to give you something real, calibrated, just real enough that you would feel I had let you in. And then I was going to, it's all right, May. It is not all right. It is, she laughed, a hot, broken-edged sound. It is humiliating. I am the Mizukage. I have done this work, this exact work, successfully against 3 foreign ministers, a daimyo's son, and a land of iron general. I am good at this. And you have been, she gestured vaguely, helplessly at him, you have been patient with me, like I was a child trying to deceive an adult. That's not what it's been. Then what, May? He turned her gently by the shoulders. He did not pull her close, he just made her face him. If I had thought you were lying for any reason other than fear, I would not have stayed. I have been around plenty of liars. You're not one of them. You're a woman who was given a job by people she despises, and you took it because you despise the alternative more. That is not lying. That is enduring. I have a lot of patience for enduring. I have less than no patience for liars. You're being too kind to me. I'm being exactly the right amount of kind to you. You're just out of practice receiving it. She looked at him. In the cobalt dark his eyes were almost black. The wind moved his hair. The council met last night, she said, without me, with 2 coastal lords. One of them was Kasuga's cousin. They are deciding what to do about me. Al thinks they have stopped seeing me as their instrument. Good, good. They've been wrong to use you. They've been wrong to use me. They were going to be wrong about both of us either way. Better they figure it out now while there are only 3 of them in the room making the wrong decision than later when there are 30. They will try to remove me. Yes, they may try to remove you too, probably, and you say good. I say good because we are now in a fight, I understand, with people who have made their intentions clear, and I am very tired of pretending I have not been in a fight for 2 weeks. She looked at him for a long time. Naruto, I am going to ask you a thing now, and I want you to think about it before you answer. All right, she breathed in, she breathed out. If I move against them, she said, I am not just removing 3 elders. I am breaking the spine of the system that has held Kiri together since Yagura died. There will be people who follow them. There will be a fracture. I do not know how deep it will go. I do not know if I can put the village back together after. Yeah, I cannot do it alone. Number, I am asking you, she said, and her voice was very steady because she had decided somewhere on the walk up that if she was going to ask this question, she was going to ask it like a woman and not like a child. I am asking you, Naruto Uzumaki, if you will stand with me when I do it, not as Hokage, not as Konoha's envoy, as you, as a man who has decided that this is a thing worth standing in. Because if your answer is no, then I need to know now, while there is still time for me to find a different plan. And if your answer is yes, then I need to know that too, because then there is no different plan and I would like to stop pretending there might be. He looked at her. He did not answer immediately. She appreciated that. The fast answer would have been the wrong one. She would not have trusted it. He looked out at the cove. He looked back at her. He took her hand in his, not romantically, the way one takes the hand of a person whose grip one wants to feel, and he held it for a moment. Yes, he said, that was all, yes. She felt something in her chest do a small, terrible, quiet thing that was not relief and not joy and not even particularly happiness. It was, she thought, the thing one feels when a door one had been pushing against without realizing it suddenly opens and one steps through into a different room. All right, she said, all right, thank you, don't thank me, you'd have done it without me. Yes, she said, but badly, he smiled. Naruto, there is one more thing I would like to do tonight before we go back. What's that? I would like to kiss you again, now that we are not pretending. He laughed. It was a real laugh, startled out of him, the way her own first laugh in the tea room had been. The sound of it carried over the cove and was taken by the wind. Yeah, he said. Yeah, all right. She kissed him. It was not a tactical kiss. It was not calibrated. Her hands did not go to his face. They went instead into the front of his coat, fisting in the wool, because she was afraid for one foolish second that he was going to step away, and she wanted to make sure he did not. He did not step away. He stepped closer. He put one hand at the small of her back and the other along her jaw, and he kissed her the way a man kissed a woman he had been thinking about for 2 weeks, and had been thinking very carefully about not kissing the whole time. She did not know how long they stood there. Long enough for the last of the brass to leave the western sky, long enough for the cold to find the gaps in her coat, long enough that when she finally stepped back her mouth felt warm in a way the rest of her did not, and the headland felt simultaneously enormous and small, and her hands were no longer shaking. Right, she said. She wiped her thumb across her lower lip, half a smile coming with it. All right, we should go back. We should. Neither of them moved. Naruto, there is also one more thing I would like to say before we go back. Say it. She drew herself up. She straightened her coat. She fixed her hair, which the wind had ruined, with one impatient hand. She looked at him with the small, fierce expression she had once worn on the morning she had taken the hat for the first time, and she said, They are going to find out. They will find out by morning, possibly. They have eyes I do not know about. When they find out, they will move. They will move against me first because I am the easier target, and against you second because they are not stupid enough to come at you head-on. We have until they move. That is everything we have. How long do you think that is? A day, 2, if Genbu is being cautious, and Genbu is always cautious. Then we have 2 days. We have 2 days. What's the play? She thought. We do not run, she said. We do not hide. We do not try to head them off at the meeting. We do nothing tonight, and we do nothing tomorrow morning. We let them come to us. When they come, I want them in my tower, on my floor, in front of the witnesses I choose. I want them in the open, where they have to say their accusations out loud, where the captains of the mist hear it from their own mouths instead of from my mouth. I want the rot to name itself. And then I cut it out. He looked at her for a long moment. You really are kind of terrifying, you know that? Yes, that wasn't a complaint. I know, he grinned. He offered her his arm, formally, ridiculously, the way one offered an arm at a court dance, and she took it, because the absurdity of it was the only thing in the world right then that she could safely respond to, and they walked back down the long path together with the wind at their backs and the village's lights beginning to show below them, soft and yellow and small, like a thing worth keeping. Ao was where he had said he would be, which was nowhere visible. He fell in behind them at a respectful distance, approximately a third of the way down the headland, and stayed there until they were inside the residence's outer wall. He did not ask questions. He did not need to. At the entrance to the residential wing, before they parted, Naruto stopped. May, yes, when you go to your office tonight, he said, burn whatever paper you've been keeping, everything with the council's names on it, everything with notes on me, anything that could be read by someone who isn't you, tonight, before you sleep. Yes, and May, yes, sleep, she laughed. It was small, it was hers. I'll try, he nodded. He bowed, the formal slight bow he gave her in public, with a small private grin attached this time, and he disappeared down the corridor toward his rooms. She stood there for a moment. Then she turned and went up the stair to her office and built a fire in the brazier and burned everything Naruto had told her to burn. The papers went up fast. The names of 3 elders and 40 pages of marginalia and 1 folder with a leaf and spiral stamped on its cover all curled black and lifted in light flakes and were gone. When the last of it was ash, she sat in her chair, hands folded on the empty blotter, and looked at the night beyond her window for a long time. She did sleep, eventually. She slept hard. In a small room 3 floors down and 1 wing over, Elder Jami did not sleep. He sat at a low table with a single lamp burning and a single sheet of paper in front of him, and he read, for the 3rd time, the report from a young council courier who had been positioned on the northern headland 2 hours before sunset with instructions to observe and report. The report was 4 lines long. The 4th line was the only one that mattered. Jami read it. He set it down. He folded his hands. He looked at the lamp for a long time. Then he stood and went, despite the hour, to wake Lady Kasuga. Chapter 5. Council of Knives. Lady Kasuga did not like being woken. She was a woman of habits, and her sleep was one of them. She woke at the 4th bell every morning, drank a cup of hot water with lemon, walked twice around her inner garden regardless of weather, and only then permitted the world to begin its business with her. She had held this routine for 31 years. She had held it through war, through purge, through the death of a husband and the loss of a son. She did not break it for small things. Jami did not bring her small things. She received him in her receiving room in a heavy gray robe, with her hair down for the first time in his memory. A long, surprisingly thick fall of silver white that made her look, briefly, like a different woman. He did not comment on it. He set the courier's report on the low table between them and waited. She read it twice. She set it down precisely along the table's edge. On the headland, they kissed twice, and he asked her, she asked him, to stand with her against us. Those were her words, will you stand with me when I do it? Kasuga sat with that for a long time. Her hands were folded in her lap. They did not move. How sure of the report? It came from Inori. You trained her yourself. Inori is reliable. Yes, then it is reliable. Yes. Another long silence. From somewhere in the inner garden a bird made a small interrogative sound, the way certain birds did in the hour before dawn when they were not yet sure if the night was over. How long do we have? She said. She told him a day. 2 if Genbu was cautious. Genbu is cautious. Yes, then we do not have 2 days, we have 1. Yes, she closed her eyes. For a moment the lines around them deepened, and she looked briefly and only briefly like the old woman she was. Jami, she said. Yes, this is what I was afraid of. I know. I told you, both of you. The girl had a heart in her somewhere. I said so when you proposed her for the hat. You said it was sentimental of me. You said she had been hammered hard enough to forget it. Do you remember? I remember. And now we are here. She opened her eyes. I do not want to kill her, she said. He looked at her. I did not say we should. You did not have to. Kasuga, Jami. If we move on her openly in chambers with witnesses in the morning with the charge of compromised judgment and unsanctioned negotiations with a foreign power, there is no need for blades. The captains of the mist are old enough to remember Yagura. They will not let another Mizukage hand their village to a foreign chakra. We bring the charge. We bring the evidence. We bring Inori herself, if we must, to read her report aloud. May steps down. We install Chijuro as interim. Chijuro listens to his elders. Chijuro has always listened. Chijuro walks the residential wing every night now, Kasuga said. Personally, he pulled 3 of our seals out of the walls 4 days ago. Jami stopped. What? I assumed you knew. I did not know. Then you should. She allowed herself, for 1 second, a very small, very tired smile. Chijuro has decided where he stands. He decided it on the dock, I think, or possibly in the council chamber on day 2, when he watched her sit through your darling May and did not put his hand on his sword. He has been her man for some time. We simply did not notice. Jami sat down. He sat down heavily in the manner of an old man whose knees had been waiting an excuse. Then we cannot use him. Then who? She thought. Lord Hajiwara has 80 bannermen at the western anchorage. He moved them up 3 days ago at our request. He can be in the village inside of 4 hours by fast craft if we send the word at first light. That is a coup, Kasuga. It is a correction. It is a coup with a different word over it. She looked at him. Jami, she said, if she stands in the chamber tomorrow and we bring the charge and Chijuro puts himself between her and us, what then? What is our plan? He did not answer. And if the Uzumaki is in the room and he will be in the room, she is not stupid. She will have him in the room. What then? What is our plan? He did not answer. You said it yourself. 12 days. He has unmade her in 12 days. You think we are going to unmake him with words at a podium? I think, Jami said, that you are tired and frightened and you are reaching for the worst tool we have. I am tired. I am not frightened. And the worst tool we have is the tool we will need if the better ones have already gone over to her. Genbu's voice from the doorway said quietly, Both of you stop! Neither of them had heard him arrive. They never did. He stepped in, closed the screen behind him with the small soft click he always closed screens with and crossed to the table. He did not sit. He looked at the courier's report. He read it once. He looked at the 2 of them. Hajiwara stays at the anchorage, he said. Genbu, Hajiwara stays at the anchorage. We do not move bannermen into the village. We do not start a war we cannot finish in an afternoon. We are old. We are not desperate. What then? He considered. We do exactly what you said, Jami. We bring the charge in chambers in the morning with witnesses in the open. We give her the chance to deny it or to step down with dignity. If she denies it, the report is read. If she steps down, we accept. If she fights, he paused, if she fights, we will see who is in the room. And the Uzumaki will be in the room. We will not ask him to leave. We will speak to him directly. We will appeal to his sense of a faint, almost imperceptible distaste at the word decency. He is, by all accounts, a decent man. Decent men do not enjoy being the cause of civil disorder. You think he will step aside? I think he will be given the option to. What he does with the option is his concern. Kasuga did not look convinced, but she did not argue. She had not argued with Genbu in 20 years. She was not going to start before the sun rose. And if it goes badly? Genbu was quiet for a long moment. Then we will discover, he said, what kind of village we built. He bowed to both of them. He left. After he was gone, Jami looked at Kasuga across the lamp. You are going to send word to Hajiwara anyway. Yes. Genbu said what he had to say. I am sending word at first light, not for a coup, for insurance. If everything Genbu hopes for occurs, the bannermen remain at the anchorage and we never speak of this. If everything Genbu hopes for does not occur, then we have an army in the harbor. Then we have an option. Options are not coups, they are options. Jami looked at her for a long time. Kasuga, yes, I want it on the record between us that I am uneasy. It is on the record, Jami. All right. He stood. He bowed. He left her in the receiving room with her hair down and the lamp burning and the report on the table along its precise edge, and Lady Kasuga sat in the quiet for a long time before she finally rose to send word to her cousin. May was already awake when Ao came in. She had not slept the second half of the night, and she had not pretended to. She had gotten up at the third bell, dressed in the dark, and sat at her desk reading old after-action reports from the year of her first month as Mizukage, the year of the early purge trials, the year she had learned what it cost to bring a charge against an elder and make it stick. She had not read them in 8 years. She read them now with a small, clean pencil in her hand, marking the passages she wanted to remember. Ao did not knock. He let himself in. They sent word to Hajiwara at first light. Yes, you expected that. I expected something like it. Kasuga is the one I worried about. Kasuga has always been the one who reaches for the harder tool. She has reached for the harder tool. Yes, the bannermen are mustering at the western anchorage, 80, possibly closer to 100 if Hajiwara has been quietly recruiting, which he has. How long until they're on the water? They are on the water. They left 2 hours ago. With this wind and this tide, they make the outer harbor in 3 hours, the inner in 4. She set the pencil down. That is faster than I budgeted for. Yes. How many of mine can you have on the outer breakwater inside 3 hours? 40, 60 if I pull Chaujuro swordsmen, which I have already pulled. Pull them, pulled. The council chamber meets at second bell. Yes. They do not know we know about the bannermen. They do not. They will bring the charge in chambers and assume the bannermen are insurance. They will not deploy the bannermen unless they have to. Yes. Then we do not let them have to. She stood. She rolled the after-action reports into a neat tube, tied them with a length of black ribbon, and placed them on the corner of her desk where she could see them without looking at them. Oh, Lady Mizukage, has Naruto eaten breakfast? He is eating it. Where? In the inner garden, with your gardener. They are, as far as I can tell, arguing about the proper season to prune the twisted pine. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Tell him I will be in the chamber at second bell. Tell him to come as himself, not as Konoha's envoy. Tell him to sit on my left, not my right today. Yes, Lady Mizukage, may I ask why the left? Because the right is where the witnesses sit, and the left is where the answer to the question goes. Ao bowed. Lady Mizukage, yes, you have in the last 8 years done a great deal of good in this office. Don't, Ao, I am not eulogizing. I am giving you a fact for the record. There is a difference. All right, thank you for the fact. You are welcome. He left. She stood at the window for a moment and watched the gulls coming up off the harbor in their long, uneven flight. Then she dressed for chambers. She put on the formal robes, the heavy ones, the ones with the deep green silk under the gray, and she pinned her hair up the way she had pinned it on her investiture day. She fixed the small carved jade comb that had belonged to her mother through her hair at the base of the knot. She looked at herself in the dark mirror in the corner of her dressing chamber for one long moment. Then she went down to the chamber. The council chamber was a long, low-ceilinged room with a curved bench along the far wall, 3 carved chairs on a slight dais, a witness rail along the left, and a single open floor in the middle where, in the old days, the Mizukage accused had stood. May had taken office and rearranged the chairs so that the Mizukage seat faced the council's bench at equal height. The dais had been her single redecoration. The council had complained for a year. They had eventually stopped. This morning the dais was empty when she walked in. So was the curved bench. She was first. She had planned to be first. She sat down. She arranged her robes. She set her hands on the arms of the chair. The witnesses filed in over the next quarter hour. 3 captains of the mist in field gray. The harbor master who had been on the dock the night of the storm. 2 senior ministers, not Hekaru of Maritime Affairs, who was nowhere to be found this morning, which she noted. The protocol secretary, with her enormous bound ledger that recorded every word spoken in the chamber. Chijuro, in formal dress, with haramkari across his back, who took up a position on the witness rail without being asked. The council came in last. They came together. Jami with his cane, Kasuga in her severe knot, Genbu in the dark robes he wore for serious business. They took the curved bench in their usual order. Jami center, Kasuga left, Genbu right. Naruto came in after them. He came in alone on time in the same dark coat he had worn the night before. He did not bow to the council. He bowed to May. He took the seat to her left, which Ao had moved into place an hour earlier, a plain chair set at her height without ceremony. The protocol secretary looked at the empty space to May's right, where Konoha's envoy was supposed to sit, and then at Naruto on the left, and then very carefully wrote something in her ledger. Jami cleared his throat. Lady Mizukage, elder. This session has been called by the council. We have a matter to lay before you. Lay it. He laid it. He laid it well. She had to give him that. He was old, and he was tired, and he had not slept either, but he was a professional, and he laid the charge cleanly. He cited the ancient Kiri precedent. The Mizukij's first obligation was to the village's sovereignty, not to any personal entanglement. He cited the recent precedent, Yagura, the bloody mist, the long shadow of a Mizukij who had been moved by something other than the village's interest. He did not say foreign chakra. He said unsanctioned attachment and compromise of independent judgment, and the appearance, if not yet the substance, of a Mizukij whose loyalty has been divided. He did it without ever once looking at Naruto, which was a piece of theater she also had to give him. He laid the evidence. Inori's report was not read aloud. That would have been crude. He said only there are eyewitness accounts by reliable council operatives of the Mizukij in private and intimate contact last night with the Hokage of Konohagakure on the northern headlands outside any sanctioned diplomatic frame. He did not say kiss. He did not need to. The chamber understood. The witness captains shifted on the rail. The protocol secretary's pen scratched. May sat very still in her chair. When he was done, he folded his hands on his cane and waited. "Is that the charge?" she said. "That is the charge. Is there more?" "There is more, should it become necessary. We hope it will not." "Hope is a luxury, Elder." A faint, tight smile from him, the smallest acknowledgement. "Lady Mizukij, you may answer the charge. You may also, if you find yourself unable to answer, withdraw from this office with the dignity owed to your service. The council would accept the second course with gratitude." She did not answer right away. She looked instead at the three captains on the rail. She knew all three of them. The eldest, Daicha, had been a chunin under Yagura. He had killed his own cousin during the bloodline purges because he had been ordered to, and he had spent 20 years living with that, and he had never once tried to lie about it to himself or anyone else. He was looking at her now with the flat, unreadable face of a man who had been told one story and was waiting to hear the other. She looked at Chijuro. Chijuro nodded once, small, almost invisible. "I am here." She looked at Naruto. He was looking at her. He was sitting with his hands folded loosely in his lap, and his coat open at the throat, and an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. "Whatever you say," the expression said, "I am with you." She turned back to the council. "I will answer the charge," she said. "Lady Mizukij," Genbu began in his quiet way, and she cut him off. "I will answer it in full. I will answer it on the record. Secretary, please attend." The protocol secretary lifted her pen. "The charge is that I, as Mizukij, have entered into an unsanctioned and intimate connection with the Hokage of Konohagakure, and that this connection compromises my independent judgment in the matter of relations between Kiri and Konoha. Is that the substance, Elder?" "That is the substance. I confirm the connection." A long, very small silence in the chamber. Jami's mouth tightened. Kasuga's eyes did not change. Genbu inclined his head. "I confirm," she continued evenly, "that I met privately with the Hokage last night on the northern headland. I confirm that the meeting was personal in nature. I confirm that I asked him a question that I had not asked any other man in my life, and that he gave me an answer that I have accepted. I will not characterize the meeting further, because the further details are not the council's business." She paused. "I deny that this connection compromises my judgment. Lady Mizukij, I deny it on the following grounds. First, the council itself instructed me on the day before the Hokage's arrival to pursue such a connection as a matter of state policy. I have witnesses to that instruction. I will name them if required. The council, having ordered me to seduce him, cannot now charge me with having been seduced." Jami went very still. "Second, the connection, in whatever form it takes, has not produced a single concession in negotiations that does not favor Kiri. The tariff schedule on grain has been adjusted in our favor by 4%, a saving to the village of approximately 140,000 ryo annually. The defense cooperation accords contain a clause drafted yesterday afternoon that obligates Konoha to come to our aid in the event of coastal aggression by any third party without requiring reciprocal commitment on our part. These are matters of record. The protocol secretary will confirm." The protocol secretary, without looking up, said, "Confirmed." Third, while the council has been negotiating in private with Lord Hajiwara of the Western Archipelago, and while Lord Hajiwara's bannermen have, at the council's request, mustered at the western anchorage and are currently—" She paused, glanced at a small wooden clock on the side wall. "Approximately 1 hour from the inner harbor. I, by contrast, have negotiated with no foreign party except the one the council sent me to negotiate with. I leave it to the captains of the mist to determine which of us is, in fact, the party whose judgment is compromised." The chamber went very quiet. Daichai, the eldest captain on the rail, turned his head a quarter-inch. He looked at Jami. Jami's hand on the head of his cane had gone white at the knuckles. Kasuga said into the silence, with the calm she always had when she had decided that calm was the most expensive thing she could spend, "The bannermen are at the anchorage to defend Kiri against the possibility of conflict that may arise from this chamber session. They are not, Lady Kasuga." "Yes, Lady Mizukage." "The bannermen are on the water, not at the anchorage. On the water. They left 2 hours ago. I have 40 mist on the outer breakwater. I have Chijuro's swordsmen in reserve. I am informing you on the record that if your cousin's craft enters the inner harbor under arms, my mist will engage them, and the chamber session will be conducted, from that moment forward, in a village that is being defended against the council that called the session. I would prefer that not be the case. You can prefer it with me by sending word now that the bannermen are to turn back." Kasuga's hand moved, very slightly, toward the small folding fan in her sleeve, which Mei knew was the gesture she made when she was about to lie. She did not lie. She did not, in fact, do anything. She sat with her hand a quarter of the way to her sleeve, and she looked at Mei, and her face did a slow, almost invisible thing, and Mei realized with a small, clean shock that what Kasuga's face was doing was thinking about her son, the son she had lost. The one Mei had heard about in passing 20 years ago in connection with the purge. For one terrible second, Mei felt sorry for her. The second passed. "Send the word, Kasuga." Kasuga's hand lowered. She did not send the word. "I cannot," she said, "without consulting my cousin's position. The bannermen are under his command, not mine. He will be assessing how many of his men he is about to lose. Send the word." "Lady Mizukage, we are still in chambers. The charge has not been resolved." "The charge has been resolved. You simply have not noticed yet. Captain Daichai straightened a fraction. "Lady Mizukage, on the record in this chamber, do you, as senior captain of the Mist, regard my judgment as compromised by what has been laid before you here today?" Daichai looked at her. He looked at the council. He looked, briefly and unexpectedly, at Naruto, who returned the look without expression. "On the record, Lady Mizukage." His voice was rough. He did not often use it formally. "I regard your judgment as the clearest in this room. Thank you, Captain." "You're welcome, Lady Mizukage." Jami stood. He did it slowly. He did it with effort. His knees, which she had once seen him kneel on for an entire 7-hour memorial, betrayed him a little. The cane took more of his weight than usual. He stood the way an old man stood when he had run out of cards and refused to admit it. "This is a coup, then," he said. "No, Elder, yours was the coup. You moved bannermen against your own Mizukage. I am defending my office. There is a difference. The chamber will note it." "The chamber will note nothing of the kind." "The chamber will." The doors at the far end of the chamber slammed open. A page, Ao's page, the boy with the pale hair and the long legs, came in running. He stopped halfway down the chamber, took in the assembled witnesses and counsel, and made the decision correctly to deliver his message directly to the Mizukage instead of through any intermediate. "Lady Mizukage, outer breakwater. The bannermen made the turn into the inner channel 4 minutes ago. Ao engaged. 3 craft were broken before the others held back. The 3rd craft was," he hesitated, "Lord Hajiwara was on it." "Is he alive?" "Ao took him. He is alive." "Where is he?" "On the dock, restrained. Ao is bringing him." "Good. Lady Mizukage, there is more. Speak." 2 of the council's outer guards have moved on the residence. They have engaged Chijuro's reserve at the south stair. The reserve is holding, but the guards moved on instruction of— He glanced almost involuntarily at Jami. "An instruction sent to them at first light. We intercepted the courier." Jami closed his eyes. The whole chamber understood in one motion what had just happened. Kasuga very quietly said, "Jami." Jami did not answer. "Jami, you sent—" "I sent insurance," he said, "of my own. Without telling you, I am sorry." She looked at him with an expression that was very hard to read. It was not anger, it was almost grief. "Oh, Jami, I am sorry, Kasuga," May stood. She stood slowly, the way she had stood the day she was confirmed, and her robes fell around her in a long line, and the green silk under the gray caught the chamber light, and she said, "Elder Jami, Elder Kasuga, Elder Genbu, you are relieved as of this moment of all duties and privileges of the Mizukage Council. You will be held under house guard pending a full inquiry. You will be permitted to speak, to write, and to send word to your families. You will not be permitted to leave your residences or to receive any visitor who has not been cleared by Ao or Chijuro. If you cooperate with the inquiry, you will live. If you do not, you will also probably live, because I am not Yagura, but the probably is doing a great deal of work, and I encourage you not to lean on it. Captain Daicha, Lady Mizukage, take them!" Daichai moved, so did Jami. The old man's hand left the head of his cane in a movement that did not belong to an old man, and the cane itself came apart in two pieces. The lower half was a sheath, and the upper half had a blade in it, a thin, clean strip of folded steel that he had been holding under his palm for 50 years, and May realized he had carried that blade into every council meeting they had ever had, and she had never once searched him. He went for Naruto, not for her. For Naruto. He had decided at some point in the last 60 seconds that the man on the chair to May's left was the cause of everything, the foreign chakra, the toppling of his system, the end of his life's work, and the small, fast violence of his hand was the only protest left to him. The blade did not reach. Naruto did not move from the chair. The blade stopped, an inch from his throat, suspended in the air by a small, invisible thing that was not a hand and was not a jutsu May had ever seen named. The old man's wrist locked. His knees buckled. He went to the floor of the chamber slowly, knee first, then hip, then shoulder, in a controlled descent that was the work of whatever Naruto had done to him. The blade fell from his hand. It hit the wood with a clean sound. Naruto stood up. He stood up the way she had stood up, without hurry, settling his coat, brushing nothing off it. He walked over to Jami on the floor. He crouched beside him. "Hey," he said quietly, the same gentle voice he had used on the lead attacker on the training ground. "It's all right. I'm not going to do anything to you. I just wanted you to know I could have." Jami looked up at him. His eyes, in that moment, were not the eyes of the man who had run the Mist Council for 30 years. They were the eyes of an old shinobi who had just discovered late that he had been running operations against a man who was, in raw fact, simply on a level he had not previously credited. "Why?" Jami said. His voice was hoarse. "Why what? Why are you doing this, any of this? You could have anything. You could have a peaceful term as Hokage. You could have a quiet life. You picked this. Why?" Naruto looked over at May. May looked back. "Because she asked me," he said. He stood up. He stepped back. He returned to his chair and sat in it. And Daichai came forward and lifted Jami to his feet without unkindness and walked him out of the chamber, with Kasuga following on her own feet and Genbu following behind her, and the doors of the chamber closed behind them with the soft, heavy sound of long-used wood. The chamber was quiet. The protocol secretary, very carefully, wrote down what she had heard. Outside, distantly, from the direction of the harbor, the sound of fighting tapered off and stopped. May sat back down. She put her hands on the arms of her chair. She felt abruptly the cold tremor that always came after a thing one had been holding upright for a long time was finally allowed to fall. She controlled it. "Captain Daicha will return," she said, to the room and report. "We are not done here. The session is paused, not closed. The council seats are vacant pending the inquiry. The Mizukage office continues without interruption in the interim." She paused. She looked at the witnesses on the rail. "Thank you for being here," she said. "I am aware that what you have witnessed will become a story. I am aware that the story will travel. I am asking each of you to tell the story you witnessed, not the story you were told. That is all I will ever ask of you." The harbor master, who had said nothing the entire session, put his hand over his heart. The captains on the rail bowed. The protocol secretary closed her ledger. May stood again. She turned to Naruto. "You all right? I'm all right. Thank you. Don't thank me. I will thank you anyway. May, yes, your hand." She looked down. Her right hand on the arm of the chair was shaking. She had not noticed. He stepped over. He put his hand over hers gently on the chair arm and pressed it down until it stopped. He did not say anything. He did not need to. "All right," she said quietly. "All right." Outside, somewhere over the harbor, a gull cried, "Late, going wherever gulls went after." Chapter 6. The mist clears the wind off the harbor was different at dawn. May had noticed this years ago and had never said it to anyone, because it was the kind of thing that, said aloud, sounded like a poet's observation, and she had long ago decided that a Mizukij was permitted to think like a poet, but never to speak like one. The wind at dawn came in from the open sea, cold and clean, carrying nothing of the village with it. The wind at evening came down off the hills, carrying everything the village had spent the day being. The two winds met somewhere over the inner harbor at the 7th bell of the morning and the 7th bell of the evening, briefly, and the gulls knew this and rode the seam of it. She watched them ride it now, from the window of her office, 3 days after the session in chambers. A great deal had happened in 3 days. The inquiry had begun at 2nd bell the morning after, and was scheduled to run for a full month. Daichai had taken provisional command of village security. 2 of the 3 captains on the rail had volunteered for the inquiry panel without being asked, and the third had asked for a private meeting with her in which he had wept once in a controlled manner, before pulling himself together and asking for a posting on the western coast where, he said, he could be useful. She had given him the posting. He had thanked her by bowing so deeply she had thought, briefly, that he was going to put his head on the floor. Lord Hajiwara had been formally detained pending charges of armed approach to the Mizukij's village without sanction. He had spent 2 days insisting it was a misunderstanding. On the morning of the 3rd day, his wife had arrived from the Western Archipelago, gone into his cell, and emerged 20 minutes later with the dictated full confession of every clandestine arrangement her husband had ever made with the council, written out in Lord Hajiwara's own hand. Lady Hajiwara had given the confession to Ao, bowed to May from a respectful distance across the courtyard, and gone home. May had made a quiet note to invite Lady Hajiwara to dinner once the inquiry was over. Jami was under house guard. He had not spoken since the morning of the session. His daughter, a quiet midwife from the merchant district whom May had never previously met, had come to the residence and asked permission to stay with him during the inquiry, and May had granted it. The daughter had thanked her without crying, which May had appreciated. Kasuga was also under house guard in her own home with her hair down. She had asked through her steward for one thing, permission to walk her in her garden twice a day, weather regardless. May had granted it. She had also, after thinking about it, sent her own gardener, the one who outlasted regimes, to look at Kasuga's twisted pine and tell her where the water was. The gardener had returned the next day and said only, "We drank tea, Mizukij-sama. The tree is fine." She did not ask me anything I would have refused to answer. May had not pressed. Genbu had hanged himself on the 2nd night. He had done it in the small windowless room where he and Jami and Kasuga had met for 30 years, with a length of his own sash, from a beam he had probably picked out the first time he had ever stood in that room. He had left a single sheet of paper on the table. The paper had 3 lines on it. The first line read, "I am sorry to Kiri." The second line read, "I am not sorry to the Mizukij." The third line read, "Do not ask Jami why. He does not know." May had read the paper twice, folded it, locked it in her bottom drawer, and not spoken of it that day. She had spoken of it to Naruto briefly that night on the wide stone at the foot of the twisted pine in the inner garden, and he had listened and had not said anything that wasted her time, which was the thing she had begun in the last 2 weeks to trust him most for. The harbor fight had cost her 7 missed wounded and no dead. Hajiwara's bannermen had lost 4, 3 drowned when their craft broke up against the breakwater. 1 killed by Ao in the boarding. Ao had not enjoyed killing him. She had been able to tell because Ao had reported the engagement to her in the shortest sentences he had ever used in her presence. She had not pressed on that either. Some things one let a man tell in his own time or never. Konoha had been informed by Hawk on the 2nd morning. The reply Hawk had come back the 3rd morning at 1st bell with a sealed letter in handwriting she did not recognize, and a small folded note tucked inside it in handwriting she did. The letter was a formal expression from the acting Hawkage Council that Konoha regarded the recent internal events of Kirigakure as Kirigakure's own business, and offered its continued support to the Mizukij of Kiri in whatever capacity was needed, signed in 3 different hands at the bottom. The note inside, in the second handwriting, said only, "Don't be stupid." She had read the note 3 times. Then she had laughed, which was the first time she had laughed in 3 days. And she had taken the note down to the inner garden and shown it to Naruto. And he had read it and said, "Yeah, that's him," and laughed too. And the two of them had sat on the wide stone for an hour after that without saying very much at all. Now, at the 7th bell of the morning, the gulls were riding the seam over the inner harbor, and May was watching them, and there was a soft knock at her door, 3 even spaces, the third slightly softer than the first 2. "Come in, ow," he came in. "Lady Mizukage. Ow, 3 things. First, the trade accords are ready for final signature. Hekaru's replacement at Maritime has reviewed them. They are clean. He recommends signature." "Where is Hekaru, by the way?" "Hekaru is in Suna. He fled in a fishing boat on the morning of the session and has, according to a sand agent who owes me a debt older than both of us, been seen drinking heavily in a tea house near the south gate. The sand agent asks if we want him back. Tell the sand agent we do not. Tell her that Suna may keep him as a gift from a grateful mist." "As you say." "What's the second thing?" "The captains have submitted a formal petition. It is signed by all the senior captains and most of the junior ones. They are requesting that the structure of the Mizukage Council be reformed before any new council is seated. They are requesting that the new council not exceed 5 members, that 2 of those members be elected from the village proper rather than appointed from the bloodline elders, that the council's authority be limited to advisory in matters of foreign policy, and that the Mizukage retain final authority on all matters of state security." She looked at him. "How long have they been writing that petition?" 11 days, Lady Mizukage. 11. Daichai started it the morning after the dock. He did. She let herself, for a moment, allow a slow, small smile. "Tell him I have read it and that I am prepared to bring it to public review. We will hold the review in the open chamber, not the council chamber. Anyone who wants to speak may speak. Set it for 10 days from now. I want the inquiry past its first stage before we begin." "Yes, Lady Mizukage." "The third thing," he hesitated. "The Hawkage has formally requested, through standard diplomatic channel, an extension of his envoy posting in Kirigakure by an additional 6 months." She did not turn from the window. "Through standard diplomatic channel." "Yes, he could have asked me directly. He sent the formal request, Lady Mizukage, because he said, and I am quoting him with apologies for the informality, I want her to be able to say no without it being awkward at breakfast." She closed her eyes briefly. "Of course he did. The acting Hawkage Council has approved the extension on Konoha's side, pending your acceptance. Should I prepare an acceptance for your signature?" "Prepare it." "Yes, Lady Mizukage. And ow. Yes, thank you for all of it. For the 11-day petition you knew about and did not tell me about because Daichai asked you not to. For the bannermen. For the night you stood at a respectful distance from a headland. For 3 days of being the only person in this residence who has slept less than I have. Thank you," he bowed. "It has been my honor, Lady Mizukage." He left. She stood at the window for another moment. The gulls had stopped riding the seam and had moved off toward the outer cliffs. The wind was changing. She closed the window. Then she went down to the inner garden, because she had told Naruto she would meet him there at the 8th bell, and the 8th bell was 4 minutes away, and she did not any more want to be late. He was on the stone. He was always on the stone now. The gardener, who had developed in the last week an alarming fondness for the Hawkage of Konohagakure, on the grounds that the Hawkage of Konohagakure was the first person who had ever asked the gardener's opinion on pruning seasons and then actually followed the advice, had, without consulting May, moved a small lacquered tea tray onto the stone. It had 2 cups on it. It had been there for 3 days. The gardener was nowhere visible. He had a 6th sense about these things. Naruto looked up when she came in. "Morning! Morning!" She sat down on the stone beside him. There was room. There had always been room. The stone was probably 800 years old and had been sat upon by a great many people and had not been bothered by any of them. He poured. She accepted the cup. The tea was a different blend today, something simpler, smoke and pine, no calibrated additions, no chemical tilt. She drank. "It's good." The gardener picked it. He would. They drank for a while. The garden was quiet. Somewhere in the rocks, the small fat carp moved under the water in his unhurried way. The light through the screen was the clean morning light of a day that had decided, against the season's usual habits, not to rain. Ao tells me you've asked to stay another 6 months. He told you fast. He always tells me fast. What do you think? She thought about it. She thought about it the way he thought about things which she had been learning to do without rush, with the understanding that the answer would be there when she got to it. I think, she said, that 6 months is short. It is. I think a year would be more appropriate. It would. I think that if my envoy from Konoha is going to be here for a year, he should probably move out of the residential wing, because the residential wing is for visiting dignitaries, and the longer he stays in it, the more the protocol secretary will write about it in her ledger, and there are limits to what I am willing to subject the protocol secretary to. Where should he move? She looked at him. There is a small house on the upper headland, she said, about a quarter-mile from where we walked. It belonged to my mother. It has been empty for 21 years. I keep the roof in repair. The gardener goes up there once a season and prunes a hedge that does not technically need to be pruned. It has 3 rooms, a kitchen, a small inner garden of its own, and a view of the cove. If my envoy wanted somewhere that was not the residential wing, he might find it acceptable. He was quiet for a moment. May, yes, that sounds like a thing you do not offer lightly. It is a thing I do not offer lightly. Just so I understand what I'm being offered. You are being offered, she said carefully, the chance to keep being whatever it is we have been being for a year in a house that is mine, without the residence and the protocol secretary and the ledger writing about it. You are not being offered marriage. I'm not asking for that. Not now. Perhaps not ever. I have not decided. I do not want to make any promise I will be too proud to break, and I do not want to ask any promise of you that you will be too kind to break. What I am offering is a year of practice at being 2 people in the same house without anything else attached to it. After the year, we will see. That's a fair offer. It is the only offer I trust myself to make right now. It is also a generous one. It is also a generous one, I am aware. He nodded slowly and set his cup down. Yes, he said, yes, to the house, to the year, to the practice. Good, May, yes. I will probably break some things in the kitchen. I am bad in kitchens. I know, the gardener has been telling me about your kitchen habits for a week. He has formed opinions. He's formed opinions about everything. He has, yes. He told me yesterday that you snap the heads off your tea blossoms wrong. I do not snap them off wrong. He says you do. He says everyone does. He once told a foreign ambassador that the ambassador's calligraphy looked like a chicken had fallen asleep on the page. The ambassador signed the trade accord anyway because the ambassador was afraid of him. Naruto laughed. She laughed. The gardener, somewhere not visible, was almost certainly listening, but the gardener kept his secrets and they were safe with him. They drank their tea. After a while she said more quietly, there will be people who do not like this. There will. The inquiry will produce some of them. The reformed council, when it is seated, will produce more. There will be village factions that read your year here as proof of something they have feared for years. There will be foreign powers. Iwa is the one I am thinking of, and possibly Kumo, if the Reikage is in a difficult mood, who will write letters to me. I have answers for the letters. The answers will not satisfy everyone. I know. I will not hide you. I know. I will not hide us. I am done hiding. If a thing is going to be a thing, it will be a thing in daylight. I will sign the documents in my own hand, and I will eat dinner with you in the open hall when I want to, and I will go up to the house on the upper headland when I want to, and the protocol secretary can write what she likes. Good. It will probably be hard. It will probably be hard. You are very calm about this. I have spent most of my life being talked about by people whose business it wasn't. I am very, very tired of caring about it. If your village has opinions, your village has opinions. I will be polite to your village. I will not be polite to anyone who comes for you. She looked at him sideways. Naruto, do not threaten my village. I am not threatening your village. I am clarifying for your village. There is a difference. There is a difference, she conceded. Yes, she finished her tea. She set the cup on the tray. She leaned over after a moment of consideration and rested her head briefly on his shoulder. Not for long, just long enough to be a thing that had happened. Then she straightened, smoothed her robes, and stood up. I have to go back, she said. Daichai is presenting the inquiry's interim findings at the 10th bell. I cannot be late. The protocol secretary will have feelings about it. Go. Will you be here when I get back? I'll be wherever you tell me to be. Be here. I'll be here. She left. The interim findings ran past the third afternoon bell, but Daichai handled them with the grim competence she had come to expect. There were no surprises. There would be small surprises later, when the second stage interviews began, but the first stage had produced exactly what May had predicted. A long, careful confirmation of what everyone in the village already half knew. The council had been running parallel governance for years. They had not, as it turned out, been doing it with malice. They had been doing it with fear. Genbu's note had been correct. I am sorry to Kiri. The fear had been real and the village had paid for it, and now the village would, slowly, learn not to pay for it anymore. She signed the trade accords at the fifth bell. The new maritime minister, a wiry woman named Sasori who had run the office's second desk for 9 years and who had been quietly furious for at least 7 of them, witnessed the signature with the satisfaction of a person whose patience had finally been rewarded. The accords would be in Konoha's hands by week's end. She sent the formal acceptance of the envoy extension at the 6th bell. At the 7th bell, the gulls came up from the harbor again, in the long, uneven flight she had watched in the morning, riding the seam where the 2 winds met. She watched them from the window of her office for a moment. Then she put on her coat, the plain one, not the formal one, and she went down to the inner garden, and Naruto was on the stone, as he had said he would be, and the small fat carp was moving under the water, as he always was, and the gardener was somewhere not visible, as he always was, and she sat down on the stone beside Naruto, and she did not say anything for a long time. Eventually he said, "Long day. Long day. You want to go up the hill?" "In a minute. I want to sit here for another minute first." "Okay." They sat. The light went amber. The screen of the inner garden glowed and dimmed. The first stars would not be out for another half hour, but the sky was already changing toward them. "Naruto! When I was a child, my mother used to bring me to that house, the one I told you about. She would let me run on the headland until I was too tired to run any more, and then she would carry me back, and I would pretend to be asleep on her shoulder for the last part because I liked being carried. She knew I was pretending. She carried me anyway. I never thanked her. She died when I was 11, and one of the things I have not forgiven myself for in 26 years is that I never thanked her for carrying me when she knew I was pretending." He did not say anything. He waited. "I am telling you this," she said, "because the headland is the only place I will ever take a person I want to bring there. I told you that in a different way before I kissed you. I am telling you again, more clearly, now that there is no operation and no plan and no script. I am bringing you to the house because I want to. That is the entire reason. I want you to know it is the entire reason, because I spent a long time making sure no one ever did anything to me for the entire reason of wanting to, and I do not want to start that habit on you." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for the entire reason. You're welcome, May. Yes. I would have come for the partial reason too, just so we're being honest." She laughed. "I know you would have," she said. "That is why I had to tell you the entire one." He stood. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked out of the inner garden together. The gardener, in a different room behind a different screen, picked up the lacquered tray with the 2 empty cups on it and carried it to the kitchen, where he washed both cups by hand and set them on a rack to dry. And then he closed up the inner garden for the night and went home to his small house in the merchant district and did not, as was his lifelong habit, tell anyone anything about anything. The path to the upper headland was the same path they had walked 2 weeks earlier. The wind was different, softer, less serious about itself. The light over the ridges had the long gold of a clear autumn evening. They did not talk much on the climb. They did not need to. May found with mild surprise that she had stopped being tired in the specific way she had been tired for years. She was simply tired in the ordinary way of someone who had done a great deal of work that day. The 2 tirednesses were different. She had forgotten the second one existed. The small house sat where she remembered it. The roof had been kept. The hedge had been pruned lightly, the way the gardener pruned things that did not need pruning but might appreciate the attention. The door was unlocked. She had left it unlocked 21 years ago and never locked it again, on the theory that anyone who climbed this far up the headland to steal from her mother's house probably needed whatever they could carry away. She pushed the door open. The inside was small. 3 rooms, a kitchen, a small inner garden of its own where a stand of young bamboo had grown up against the back wall in the years no one had been watching. It smelled of dust and pine resin and old paper, and faintly of the sea. There was a low table in the main room. There was a single cushion at the table. She had left it there. She had not, in 21 years, been able to bring herself to throw it away. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He came up behind her. He did not push past. He waited. She stepped in. He stepped in after her. She walked to the table. She sat down on the cushion. After a moment, she patted the floor on the opposite side of the table the way her mother would have, and he sat where she had patted. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. "Hi," she said. "Hi, welcome to the house. Thanks for having me." She did not, in the next breath, plan anything. She did not calculate the angle of any approach. She did not pick a kiss or a calibrated confession or a particular line that would communicate intent without communicating need. She simply sat across the table from him in her mother's house with the last of the gold light coming through the screen, and she let her face do whatever her face wanted to do. Her face decided after a long moment of consultation with itself that what it wanted to do was smile, just smile, the small private smile of a person who had not, in a very long time, been in a room where she did not have to be anything. "Naruto, I think," she said, "that I am going to be all right. I think you are too. It is a strange thing to be all right. I am out of practice. Yeah, I will probably do it badly at first. That's fine. You will probably help. Yeah, Naruto. It is going to be a good year." He smiled. He reached across the table slowly so she could refuse if she wanted to, which she did not, and he took her hand, and he held it on the wood between them with the kind of grip that was not asking for anything and not promising anything either, just there. "Yeah," he said, "it is." Outside, the wind off the cove shifted. Somewhere out on the water, a fisherman's bell rang once, very far off, the small clean sound carrying up the headland in the autumn air. The first star showed over the ridge. The little house held its quiet around them. In the village below, lanterns were being lit along the rope bridges. The harbor lights were coming on. Daichai was finishing his report and going home to a wife he had not seen properly in 11 days. Ao was, against all his better instincts, allowing himself a single cup of plum wine in his small kitchen. The protocol secretary was closing her ledger on a long day's entries and looking with quiet satisfaction at the neat columns of her own handwriting. Chijuro was on the south stair, walking the residential wing for no reason except that walking the residential wing was now a habit, and habits, he had decided, were worth keeping. The gardener was sitting on his front step with a cup of tea, watching the same star come up over the same ridge, telling no one anything about anything. In Lady Kasuga's inner garden, an old woman with her hair down was sitting beside a twisted pine, drinking tea alone, thinking about her son. In a small windowless room 3 corridors away from her, Elder Jami was sitting beside his daughter the midwife, who was patiently teaching him the names of the herbs she used in her work. And the old man, who had not spoken in 3 days, was, at long last, repeating the names back to her, one at a time, softly, like a man learning a language he had been promising for years to learn and had only now been given the time. In the small house on the upper headland, May Terumi, 5th Mizukage of Kirigakure, held the hand of the man who had come to her village to be used and had been kept instead. Neither of them said anything for a while. There was no need. The mist over the cove rolled in slowly, the way it always did in the hour after the first star, and rolled out again as it always did, and in its rolling neither caught nor concealed the small lit house on the headland. The mist simply passed over the headland, the way mist passed, and went on its way. The storm had passed. The wind was clean. The village below was still standing. What remained was chosen.